When a nameless waitress kisses a crime lord in front of 200 witnesses, she doesn't expect to survive the night. But Alina Moretti isn't trying to seduce Dario Vitale. She's trying to save his life. One whispered warning, one poisoned glass, one catastrophic choice that shatters everything she thought she knew about power, loyalty, and the family legacy buried beneath years of silence. Stay until the end to see how a single moment of reckless courage destroys an empire and rebuilds two broken lives. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The terrace at Villa Serafina wasn't just beautiful. It was the kind of place designed to make you forget you were mortal. White marble columns framed a view of the Mediterranean so perfect it looked painted, the sea darkening from sapphire to indigo as the sun bled into the horizon. Candles flickered in crystal holders on every table, their light dancing across silk tablecloths, and the faces of people who wore wealth like a second skin. The air smelled of jasmine, expensive cigars, and the particular tension that came from gathering this many dangerous people in one place and expecting them to behave. Alina Moretti moved through it all like a ghost. She'd been working the engagement party for 3 hours now, and her feet ached in shoes that were half a size too small. The black uniform, stiff white collar, pressed black skirt, made her feel like a mannequin. She'd spilled nothing, broken nothing, offended no one. She'd smiled when required, nodded when spoken to, and otherwise remained exactly what these people expected, invisible. That was the survival strategy. Eyes down, mouth shut, hands steady. The problem was, invisibility had given her the one thing none of these glittering guests possessed, the ability to actually see what was happening around her. More champagne, signorina? Alina turned smoothly, balancing her tray with practiced ease. A woman in a dress that probably cost more than Alina's annual rent waved her over with 2 fingers, not even looking up from her conversation. Alina poured, moved on, refilled another glass, then another. The rhythm was automatic. Pour, smile, retreat. Don't make eye contact unless absolutely necessary. Don't speak unless spoken to. She'd learned the rules early. Her nonna had worked parties like this one for 40 years before her knees gave out. "We're the help, tesoro," she used to say, her voice still carrying the rough edges of her childhood in Palermo's old quarter. "They don't see us, and that's good. Safer that way." Alina had believed her, right up until tonight. The engagement party was for Dario Vitale, which meant half of Sicily's underworld had shown up wearing designer suits and false smiles. Dario himself sat at the head table, a man who commanded attention without seeming to try. He was tall, built like someone who'd grown up fighting but learned to hide it under expensive tailoring. Dark hair, dark eyes, a face that would have been handsome if it weren't so carefully controlled. He wore power the way other men wore cologne, liberally, and with the expectation that everyone would notice. Next to him sat his fiancée, Serena Valenti. If Dario was controlled fire, Serena was ice-shaped into a blade. Blonde, elegant, with the kind of beauty that belonged on magazine covers or Renaissance paintings. Her dress was ivory silk, her jewelry understated but worth a fortune. She smiled often, laughed at the right moments, and touched Dario's arm with exactly the right amount of affection. Alina had watched her carefully all night, though she couldn't have said why. Maybe it was the way Serena's smile never quite reached her eyes. Maybe it was the way she checked her watch twice in 10 minutes, subtle enough that most people wouldn't notice. Or maybe it was simply that Alina had spent her entire life reading people. You didn't survive poverty without learning to spot danger before it announced itself. Whatever the reason, Alina was paying attention when the sommelier arrived. She recognized him immediately. Not his face, that was unfamiliar, but the way he moved, too stiff, too careful, like someone who'd rehearsed every step and was terrified of forgetting the choreography. He carried a wooden case containing 3 bottles of wine, each one probably worth more than Alina's grandmother's entire estate. "The 61 Barolo," he announced, his voice pitched to carry across the terrace. "A gift from the Valenti family, to toast the happy couple." Applause rippled through the crowd. Serena rose gracefully, touching Dario's shoulder as she gestured to the sommelier. "A rare vintage," she said, her voice warm with pleasure. "My grandfather's collection, nothing but the best for tonight." Dario smiled, though Alina noticed it didn't soften his eyes. He was good at this, playing the part everyone expected. The gracious host, the devoted fiancé, the reasonable businessman. But Alina had served enough men like him to recognize the truth beneath the performance. Dario Vitale was a predator who'd learned to wear sheep's clothing when necessary. The sommelier began opening the first bottle with exaggerated care, making a show of it. The crowd watched, murmuring appreciation. Alina moved toward the kitchen to retrieve more glasses, but something made her pause. It was subtle. So subtle, she almost missed it. As the sommelier worked, a man at one of the side tables, older, gray-suited, unremarkable, slid something across the linen tablecloth toward him. Just a quick pass, palm to palm, hidden behind the movement of reaching for bread. The sommelier's hand closed around whatever it was, and for just a second, his rehearsed calm cracked. She saw panic flash across his face before the mask snapped back into place. Alina's heart kicked against her ribs. She knew that look. She'd seen it on her father's face the night the loan sharks came to the restaurant. The night everything fell apart. It was the expression of someone caught in machinery, too big to escape. Someone who knew the price of failure but couldn't see any other way forward. The sommelier finished opening the bottle and began to pour. The wine caught the candlelight, dark as old blood. Alina started moving before she'd fully decided to, not toward the kitchen, toward the head table. Signorina, a hand caught her elbow. One of the other servers, an older woman named Bianca, who'd worked Villa Serafina for years. What are you doing? Something's wrong with the wine, Alina said quietly. Bianca's expression hardened. Don't. What? Whatever you're thinking, don't. These aren't people you want to notice you exist. Bianca's grip tightened. I've seen girls like you before. Smart enough to spot trouble, dumb enough to think anyone cares. They don't. Keep your head down and collect your pay. Alina pulled her arm free. No one needs to do anything except their job. Bianca's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. You think you're the first to see something off at one of these parties? This world has rules. Our rule is simple. We don't see, we don't hear, and we definitely don't interfere. You break that rule, you don't just lose the job. You disappear. The sommelier was moving down the head table now, filling glasses with precise movements. Serena watched him with what looked like casual interest, but Alina saw her hands clasped too tightly in her lap, saw the way she tracked every pour. You have to survive, Bianca said flatly. That's all any of us have to do. Whatever happens next isn't your problem. But Alina was already walking away, her pulse hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Bianca was right. Of course she was right. Smart people kept their heads down. Smart people survived. Alina had never been particularly smart. She'd been 7 when her parents died in a car accident that the police called tragic, and her grandmother called suspicious. She'd been 12 when she realized the restaurant her nonna had poured her life into was drowning in debt that didn't make sense, loans that predated any purchase or renovation. She'd been 17 when her grandmother died, still fighting to keep the doors open, still convinced that if she just worked hard enough, the universe would eventually show mercy. It hadn't. Alina had spent the last 5 years working 3 jobs, barely keeping the creditors from seizing the building that was the last piece of her family's history. She'd learned to be practical, to accept that some fights couldn't be won, to understand that people like her didn't get fairy tale endings. But she'd also learned that invisibility came with one dangerous advantage. No one saw you coming. The sommelier reached Dario's glass, poured carefully, precisely. The wine gleamed in the candlelight, beautiful and deadly. Serena smiled and raised her own glass. To new beginnings, she said, her voice carrying across the terrace. The guests echoed her, a chorus of crystal chiming as 200 people prepared to drink. Alina made her decision. She didn't run. That would draw attention. She walked quickly but smoothly, the way servers were trained to move through crowded spaces. She dropped her tray somewhere, abandoned it without thinking. Her hands were empty and shaking, 10 feet from the head table. Dario lifted his glass, his expression unreadable. Whatever he was thinking, whatever he felt about this engagement, this party, this life, it was locked away where no one could reach it, 5 feet. Serena's eyes tracked across the crowd, calculating, waiting. This was her moment, the culmination of whatever plan she'd set in motion. Alina could see it in the tension of her shoulders, the tight focus of her attention. 3 feet. Security noticed Alina then. Of course they did. A server approaching the head table uninvited, moving with purpose instead of deference. One of Dario's men stepped forward, his hand already reaching for her. Alina didn't slow down. She did something so completely insane, so absolutely unthinkable, that it froze everyone in place for exactly the 2 seconds she needed. She grabbed Dario Vitali by the face and kissed him. Not a polite kiss, not a hesitant brush of lips. She kissed him like she meant it, like her life depended on making it convincing, which she realized with a distant spike of hysteria it probably did. Her hands framed his jaw and she felt him go rigid with shock, felt the entire terrace erupt into chaos around them. Someone screamed, chairs scraped, men shouted, security surged forward. Alina broke the kiss just enough to press her mouth against Dario's ear, her voice barely a whisper beneath the pandemonium. "The wine is poisoned. Don't drink it." Then she stepped back, her heart threatening to explode out of her chest, and waited to see if she'd just saved his life or ended her own. For one crystalline moment, everything stopped. Dario stared at her, his dark eyes wide with something that might have been shock or might have been rage. His hand was frozen halfway to his mouth, still holding the wine glass. Around them, the party had descended into confused uproar. Guests were standing, talking over each other, some laughing like it was an elaborate joke, others looking genuinely scandalized. Serena Valenti sat perfectly still, her face a mask of ice. "What?" Dario said slowly, his voice deadly calm. "Did you just say?" Alina's mouth was dry. She could feel security closing in, could hear Bianca's warning echoing in her head. But she'd already thrown herself off the cliff. Might as well commit to the fall. "The wine," she said, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "It's poisoned. The sommelier, he was given something. I saw it. Please, you have to. She's insane." Serena's voice cut through the noise like a blade. She'd stood now, her expression shifting from shock to outrage with practiced ease. "Dario, this woman just assaulted you in front of everyone. Call security. Have her removed." "I saw him," Alina insisted, hating how her voice shook but unable to stop it. "The man in the gray suit, third table from the back. He passed something to the sommelier right before he opened the bottles." I saw the sommelier's face. He was terrified. Dario hadn't moved, hadn't set down the glass, hadn't called for security, hadn't done anything except stare at her with an expression she couldn't read. Around them, his men waited for orders, tense and ready. "This is ridiculous," Serena said. Her composure was cracking now, just slightly, stress bleeding through the perfect facade. "She's clearly trying to disrupt the party. Probably some kind of prank or—" "Where is he?" Dario interrupted quietly. Alina blinked. "What?" "The sommelier, where is he?" For the first time since the kiss, Alina looked away from Dario. Her eyes scanned the terrace, searching for the man with the wooden wine case and the rehearsed movements. He was gone. He was... She spun, checking the other direction. "He was right there. He just... Find him." Dario's voice didn't rise, but 3 of his men immediately peeled off, moving with efficient speed toward the villa's interior. He finally set down the wine glass, placing it carefully on the table without taking his eyes off Alina. "And find the man in the gray suit, third table from the back." "Dario, this is absurd." Serena stepped closer, her hand reaching for his arm. "You can't seriously be entertaining this girl's delusions. She's a nobody, a server who clearly wanted attention, and then it won't matter if we check." Dario's tone was mild, but Alina saw Serena's hand freeze mid-reach. "If she's wrong, we'll know in a few minutes. If she's right..." He turned to look at his fiancée, and something cold flickered across his face. "Well, that would be interesting." The wait was agony. Alina stood there, acutely aware that 200 people were staring at her, that she'd just kissed a man who could have her killed with a word, that she'd destroyed any chance of a normal life the moment her lips touched his. Bianca had been right. She should have kept her head down, should have let whatever was going to happen just happen, should have collected her pay and gone home and never thought about it again. But then she remembered the sommelier's face, the panic, the resignation. She thought about her father, the night the loan sharks came, how he'd looked at her and her grandmother with that same expression, trapped, terrified, out of options. How he'd made choices that didn't make sense because someone had put him in a position where nothing made sense anymore. The restaurant had been her family's dream. Her great-grandfather had opened it in 1952, a tiny place that served honest food to working people. Her grandfather had expanded it, her father had modernized it, and then, somehow, in the span of just a few years, it had been drowning in debt that consumed everything they had. Alina had been too young to understand the details, But she'd understood the result. Her parents dead, her grandmother working herself into an early grave, and Alina herself trapped in a life of endless labor just to keep one building from being seized by creditors whose names she didn't even know. If someone had orchestrated that, if someone had deliberately destroyed her family for reasons she couldn't comprehend, she wanted to know. One of Dario's men returned, his expression grim. He leaned in to whisper something in his boss's ear. Dario's jaw tightened. And the gray suit? Gone. We found his table, food half-eaten, wine untouched. Whoever he was, he left the moment the incident occurred. Incident. That was one word for it. Dario picked up the wine glass again, holding it up to the light. The Barolo looked perfect. Rich, aged, exactly what it should be. I want this tested, he said quietly. All 3 bottles. And I want the Valenti wine cellar inventoried. Every bottle my fiancé's grandfather supposedly collected. Dario, Serena's voice had gone flat, all pretense of warmth abandoned. You're making a mistake. This girl is clearly disturbed. Are you really going to embarrass both our families based on the ravings of a what? Dario turned to look at her, and Alina saw Serena flinch despite herself. A server. Someone beneath our notice? He glanced at Alina, something unreadable flickering across his face. Maybe that's exactly why we should listen. The test took 20 minutes. 20 minutes during which the party dissolved into chaos, guests whispering and speculating, security sweeping the grounds, and Alina standing frozen in the center of it all, like a specimen pinned to a board. Serena remained at the head table, her posture perfect, her expression carefully neutral. But Alina noticed her hands. They were clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. When the man in the white coat returned from whatever makeshift lab they'd set up inside the villa, his face told the story before he opened his mouth. Ricin, he said quietly, speaking only to Dario. Sophisticated delivery mechanism. Dissolved in the wine, it would have been tasteless. Symptoms wouldn't have appeared for hours. By the time anyone realized what was happening, it would have been too late. The terrace went absolutely silent. Dario stood slowly. He didn't look at Alina. He didn't look at his men. He looked directly at Serena Valenti, the woman he was supposed to marry, the woman who'd just tried to kill him in front of everyone they knew. I can explain, Serena said. Her voice was steady, but Alina saw the calculation behind her eyes. She was already pivoting, already searching for an angle. I didn't know. Someone must have tampered with the bottles, someone trying to frame me. Your grandfather's collection, Dario said softly. Your gift, your sommelier. I didn't know, Serena repeated, but the words rang hollow. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against marble. I'm calling my father. This is clearly some kind of setup, and I won't stand here and be accused. Sit down, Serena. It wasn't a request. The command in Dario's voice could have frozen the Mediterranean. Serena didn't sit. Instead, she did something that confirmed every suspicion Alina had harbored all night. She ran. Or tried to. She made it 3 steps before security grabbed her. She fought them, her elegant composure finally shattering completely. You don't understand. He's drowning the families. His methods are destroying everything our fathers built. Someone had to murder me? Dario's voice was quiet, conversational almost. Somehow that made it more terrifying. In front of witnesses? Using wine from your family's collection? That was your solution? Serena stopped struggling. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Gone was the panic, replaced by something harder, colder. It was supposed to look like you'd been poisoned by one of the smaller families. The Russos, maybe, or the Albanians. We'd have evidence planted, witnesses prepared. Your death would have sparked a war, and in the chaos, my father's alliance with the Corsi family would have taken control. We would have stabilized things, restored order. We, Dario repeated. Who's we, Serena? She laughed, brittle and sharp. You think I planned this alone? You think I have the resources, the connections? This is bigger than you realize, Dario. Bigger than one man's pride or one woman's ambition. Names. Kill me first. The standoff stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then Dario nodded to his men. Take her inside. Find out who helped her. I want every name, every connection, every person who thought they could betray me and walk away. As they dragged Serena toward the villa, she twisted back to look at him. You're already dead, she said, her voice rising. You just don't know it yet. The families are done with you, Dario. Done with your reforms, your legitimate business bullshit. You're pretending we can be anything other than what we are. You can't change what you are. None of us can. Then she was gone, and the terrace erupted into noise again. Guests were standing, talking, demanding answers, making calls. Some were already leaving, unwilling to be anywhere near what came next. Alina stood in the center of it all, forgotten again. Invisible. Except she wasn't. Because Dario Vitale was walking toward her, and every eye on the terrace was following his movement. He stopped close enough that she could see the fine details of his expression, the rage controlled beneath perfect calm, the exhaustion he couldn't quite hide, the sharp intelligence that missed nothing. "What's your name?" he asked. "Alina." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Alina Moretti." "Alina Moretti." He repeated it like he was committing it to memory. "You just saved my life." Yes, I guess I did." "Why?" The question caught her off guard. "What? Why did you save me?" Dario tilted his head slightly, studying her. "You don't know me. You have no stake in my survival. By all accounts, you should have done exactly what your colleague advised, kept your head down and ignored what you saw. So why didn't you?" Alina thought about lying. Thought about giving him some noble reason, some explanation that would make her sound brave or principled, but she was too tired for lies. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I saw something wrong and I couldn't just watch it happen, even if it was stupid, even if it was dangerous. I just couldn't." Dario was quiet for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. It wasn't a warm smile, wasn't reassuring or kind, but it was real. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met," he said, "or the most foolish. Probably both." The smile widened fractionally. "Probably." He glanced around the terrace, at the chaos still unfolding, at the guests who were watching them with undisguised fascination. "You can't go home tonight." Alina's stomach dropped. "What? Why not?" "Because whoever helped Serena plan this, and there are definitely others, they're going to know you're the reason it failed. You're a witness, a loose end." His expression hardened. "In my world, loose ends get cut." "I didn't ask to be part of your world." "No," Dario agreed. "You chose to be part of it the moment you kissed me." He gestured to one of his men. "Marco will take you somewhere safe. You'll stay there until we've secured everyone involved in the conspiracy. After that," he paused, something complicated crossing his face. "After that, we'll figure out what comes next." "I have a job. I have bills. I can't just disappear." "You don't have a choice." His voice wasn't cruel, just matter of fact. "I'm sorry, but the moment you saved my life, you painted a target on your own. The only way forward is through." Alina wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could take care of herself, that she didn't need his protection, that she could go back to her regular life and forget any of this ever happened. But she'd seen Serena's face, heard the coldness in her voice when she talked about murder like it was a business decision. She thought about her grandmother's warnings, about invisibility, keeping them safe. Too late for that now. "Okay," she said quietly, "but I want something in return." Dario raised an eyebrow. "You're in no position to negotiate." "Maybe not, but you owe me." Alina lifted her chin, meeting his eyes. "You said so yourself. I saved your life. That has to be worth something. What do you want?" "Information." The word came out before she'd fully formed the thought. "About my family. My parents died in a car accident 10 years ago, but my grandmother never believed it was random. She spent the rest of her life convinced someone had targeted them. And our restaurant, we had debt that didn't make sense, pressure from creditors we never borrowed from. Someone destroyed my family, and I want to know who. I want to know why." Dario studied her for a long moment. "You think it connects to this?" "I don't know, maybe. Serena mentioned the Valenti family. My grandmother used to talk about the Valentis sometimes. Said they owned half the businesses in our neighborhood. I never understood what she meant." Alina swallowed hard. "I just want the truth, whatever it is." Something shifted in Dario's expression. Not quite sympathy, but something adjacent to it. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. "All right," he said finally. "You stay under my protection. Do exactly what my men tell you. Don't try to leave or contact anyone without permission. In exchange, I'll look into your family's history. If there's a connection to be found, I'll find it." He extended his hand. Alina looked at this man she'd kissed to save his life, at the crime lord who now held her future in his palm, and made the second insane decision of the night. She shook his hand. "Deal." The villa Marco took her to was 20 minutes outside Palermo, hidden behind gates and cypress trees. It was beautiful in a cold, impersonal way, all marble and expensive furniture that no one actually lived with. "A safe house," Marco explained. "Somewhere Dario kept for emergencies." "You'll have everything you need," he said, showing her to a bedroom that was bigger than her entire apartment. "Don't leave the property, don't make phone calls, don't contact anyone. Someone will bring you meals. You have questions, you ask me or one of the other guards. Understood?" Alina nodded numbly. After Marco left, she sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process what had just happened. 12 hours ago, she'd been worried about making rent. Now she was hidden away in a crime lord's safe house because she'd stopped an assassination attempt by kissing the target. Her life had officially become stranger than any story her grandmother used to tell. She didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Serena's face, heard her voice. "You're already dead. You just don't know it yet." Morning came slowly. Someone knocked and left a tray of food outside her door. Coffee, pastries, fruit. Alina ate mechanically, tasting nothing. Around noon, Marco returned. "Boss wants to see you," he said. "Get ready. We leave in 10 minutes." The drive took them back toward Palermo, but instead of the city center, they headed to the docks. Old warehouses, shipping containers, the smell of salt and fish, and diesel fuel. Marco led her through a maze of buildings to a nondescript office tucked behind a legitimate freight company. Dario was inside, along with two other men Alina didn't recognize. They were bent over a table covered in documents, photographs, what looked like surveillance footage on a laptop screen. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable. "Alina, thank you for coming. Did I have a choice?" A slight smile. "Not really." He gestured to the table. "We've been busy. Serena gave us 7 names before she stopped talking. 3 of them are already in custody. The other 4 are proving difficult to locate." "Why am I here?" "Because I found something." Dario pulled out a file folder, opened it to reveal a photograph. "Your grandmother's restaurant, La Stella, correct?" Alina's throat tightened. "Yes. It was bought in 1952 by your great-grandfather, Tomas Moretti. Family business, passed down through generations. According to public records, it accumulated significant debt starting in 2009, primarily through a series of loans from a company called Meridian Holdings. I remember. The creditors. They were a shell corporation." Dario tapped the photograph. "Owned by a larger entity called Valenti Properties, which was until 3 months ago controlled by Serena's father, Antonio Valenti." The room tilted slightly. Alina reached out to steady herself against the table. "The Valentis," she whispered. "They destroyed my family's restaurant?" "Not exactly." Dario pulled out another document. "The loans were real, but they were structured in a way that made repayment nearly impossible. Variable interest rates, balloon payments, clauses that allowed the lender to call in the full amount with minimal notice. Your grandmother was paying, but the debt kept growing. Why? Why would they do that?" "Location." One of the other men spoke up, pointing to a map now spread across the table. "Your restaurant sat on a corner lot in a neighborhood that was being redeveloped. The Valentis wanted the property, but your family wouldn't sell, so they found another way." Alina felt sick. "They trapped us in debt to force us out." "It's a common strategy," Dario said quietly. "Target a business, offer loans that seem reasonable, then manipulate the terms until the owners have no choice but to default. The property gets seized, redeveloped, sold for a profit. The Valentis did it to dozens of small businesses over the years." "My parents," Alina said. "The accident. Was that?" "We're still investigating." Dario's expression darkened. "But the timing is suspicious. Your parents died 2 months after they filed a formal complaint against Meridian Holdings. The police report called it brake failure. But the mechanic who inspected the car afterward noted irregularities that were never followed up on. The world felt very far away. Alina heard herself ask, "Can you prove it?" "Not yet, but I have people looking into it. If there's evidence, we'll find it." Alina sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. All those years, all that struggle, Her grandmother working herself to death, convinced she was fighting bad luck or poor business decisions. It had been murder, slow, calculated, legal murder. The restaurant, she said hoarsely. Do the Valentis still own it? No. Dario exchanged a glance with one of his men. It was sold to another development company 6 months after your grandmother died. That company completed the renovation and flipped the property. It's currently a boutique hotel. Of course it was. Alina closed her eyes, trying to process the rage building in her chest. What happens now? That depends. Dario sat down across from her, his elbows on the table, his attention focused completely on her face. Serena's conspiracy is falling apart. We've seized her assets, frozen her accounts. Her father is cooperating. He claims he knew nothing about the assassination attempt, and I believe him. He's a businessman, not a strategist. Serena was the ambitious one. So she goes to prison. Prison? Dario's smile was cold. Sure, let's call it that. Alina understood what he wasn't saying. In this world, justice didn't come from courts or judges. The investigation into your family will continue, Dario said. I'll make sure you get answers, all of them. But after that, you have a decision to make. What kind of decision? Whether you want to go back to your life, whether you want to stay invisible. He leaned forward slightly. Or whether you want something else. Like what? Like being someone who matters, someone who makes decisions instead of surviving them. His dark eyes held hers. You walked onto that terrace and changed everything. You could have died. Should have died, probably. But you didn't. You survived, and you're still here. That means something. It means I'm an idiot who can't keep her head down. Maybe, Dario's expression softened fractionally, or maybe it means you're exactly the kind of person I need around me. Alina stared at him. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a choice. You can take the information I give you about your family and disappear. I'll make sure you're safe, that you have enough money to start over somewhere else. Clean break. He paused. Or you can stay. Work for me. Learn how this world actually operates. And when we find out what really happened to your parents, you can decide for yourself what justice looks like. It should have been an easy decision. Take the money, take the answers, run as far and fast as possible. But Alina thought about that terrace, about Serena's cold calculation as she planned murder, about the way Dario had actually listened to a nobody server instead of having her thrown out. She thought about her grandmother, who died still fighting for a building that had been stolen through legal lies. About her parents, who'd filed a complaint and ended up dead. About a lifetime of being invisible, being ignored, being powerless. If I stay, Alina said slowly, I want more than just information. I want to understand. I want to know how all of this works. The loans, the shell corporations, the pressure tactics, all of it. Dario nodded. Done. And when we find out what happened to my family, I want to be part of deciding what comes next. Not you, not your men. Me. That could be dangerous. Everything about this is dangerous, like Alina met his eyes. But I'm already in it. Might as well go all the way. For a long moment, Dario just looked at her. Then he stood and extended his hand again. Welcome to the deep end, Alina Moretti. Try not to drown. She shook his hand for the second time in 12 hours and sealed her fate. The education began the next morning. Alina woke to find Marco waiting outside her room with coffee and a stack of files thick enough to stop a bullet. He didn't smile, didn't make small talk, just handed her the materials and said, Conference room, 20 minutes. Don't be late. The conference room turned out to be in a different building entirely, an office space above what looked like a legitimate import-export business in central Palermo. The windows overlooked the harbor, ships moving in and out like pieces on a chessboard. Dario was already there, along with two people Alina hadn't met before. This is Sofia, Dario said, gesturing to a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and the sharp eyes of someone who missed nothing. She handles my legal operations, and this is Luca. The younger man nodded, barely looking up from his laptop. Financial analysis and forensic accounting. Alina set down the files. What am I doing here? Learning. Dario pulled out a chair for her, which felt oddly formal given everything else. You wanted to understand how it works, so we're going to show you. What followed was 6 hours of the most intense education Alina had ever received. Sophia walked her through the basics of shell corporations, explaining how money moved through layers of legitimate businesses to hide its origin. Luca showed her spreadsheets that looked like meaningless numbers until he pointed out the patterns. Payments timed to avoid detection, amounts structured to stay below reporting thresholds, transfers that zigzagged across international borders. The Valentis used a classic setup, Sophia explained, tapping a diagram she'd drawn on the whiteboard. They'd identify a target property, create a lending company that looked legitimate, offer loans with terms that seemed reasonable at first glance. Then the trap would close. How? Alina asked, trying to follow the complex web of connections. Buried clauses. Language so dense most people wouldn't catch it without a lawyer, and most small business owners can't afford lawyers. Sophia pulled up a contract on her tablet. Look at Section 12, subsection 4. See how it allows the lender to adjust interest rates based on market conditions without defining what that means. Your grandmother signed this in 2009. By 2011, her interest rate had tripled. Alina stared at the document, recognizing her grandmother's signature at the bottom. The handwriting was shaky. This had been late in her life, when the arthritis was getting bad, when she was desperate enough to sign anything that might save the restaurant. She didn't know, Alina said quietly. Most of them didn't. That was the point. Luca turned his laptop to show her a list of names. The Valentis targeted 47 businesses using this exact strategy between 2008 and 2015. Yours was number 32. 47 families destroyed. 47 dreams crushed under paperwork and fine print and predatory lending disguised as helping hands. Where are they now? Alina asked. The other businesses? Gone. Properties seized, redeveloped, sold. The owners scattered. Luca scrolled through the list. Some declared bankruptcy. Some left the country. 3 died during the process. Heart attacks mostly. Stress will do that. And no one stopped it? No one investigated? Sophia laughed, but there was no humor in it. Who would investigate? The loans were legal, the contracts enforceable. The Valentis had lawyers making sure every I was dotted, every T crossed. On paper, they were just business people making smart investments. That's how it works, Dario said from his position by the window. He'd been quiet most of the morning, letting his people teach. The real power isn't violence, it's paperwork. It's knowing which laws to follow and which ones have loopholes you can drive a truck through. Violence is messy, draws attention. But financial manipulation? That's invisible until it's too late. Alina thought about her grandmother, working 3 jobs in her 70s, convinced that if she just tried harder, worked longer, the debt would eventually get paid, never understanding that the game was rigged from the start. I want to see it, she said abruptly. Dario turned from the window. See what? The restaurant, what they did with it. I want to see what my family's destruction bought them. Something shifted in Dario's expression. Not quite sympathy, but close. That's not a good idea. I don't care if it's a good idea. I need to see it. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded to Marco, who'd been standing silently by the door. Bring the car around. We'll go this afternoon. The drive across Palermo felt like traveling through layers of memory. Alina hadn't been back to this neighborhood since her grandmother's funeral 5 years ago. It had hurt too much, seeing the building with different signage, knowing strangers were walking through spaces that had belonged to her family for generations. The car pulled up across the street from what used to be La Stella. Alina sat frozen, staring at what it had become. They'd kept the original facade, the honey-colored stone, the arched doorway, but everything else was different. The sign now read Casa Bella Boutique Hotel, an elegant script. Through the windows, she could see a lobby that bore no resemblance to the warm, chaotic dining room she remembered. Everything was white marble and minimalist furniture, the kind of sterile beauty that erased any trace of the lives lived there before. The developers bought it for $300,000, Luca said from the front seat, reading from his tablet. Put another $2 million into renovations. Sold it 18 months later for $6.5 million. Current owners are a hospitality group based in Milan. Numbers. That's what her family had been reduced to, a line item in someone's profit margin. I used to help my grandmother in the kitchen, Alina said, her voice distant. She'd let me roll out pasta dough. I wasn't any good at it. Always made it too thick, too uneven. But she'd use it anyway, tell the customers it was rustic style. She smiled despite herself. I was 8 years old and thought I was a real chef. Dario was quiet beside her. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful. We can go inside if you want. I know the manager. He owes me a favor. Alina shook her head. No, I don't want to see what they did to the inside. I'd rather remember it the way it was. They sat there for another minute, the engine idling, the afternoon sun turning the building's stone walls golden. Then Alina made herself look away. "Take me back," she said. The investigation into her parents' death took 3 weeks. 3 weeks during which Alina lived in a strange liminal space. Not quite prisoner, not quite guest, definitely not safe enough to go home. She spent her days learning the mechanics of Dario's world, her nights lying awake in the safe house, trying to reconcile the person she'd been with the person she was becoming. Dario himself was a study in contradictions. In meetings, he was sharp and ruthless, making decisions that affected millions of euros with the same casual efficiency most people used to order coffee. But he also spent an hour arguing with Sofia about whether they could restructure a failing shipping contract to avoid laying off 200 dock workers. He threatened a rival family's representative with casual brutality, then turned around and personally delivered a hospital donation to a children's ward. "You're staring," he said one afternoon, catching Alina watching him during a break between meetings. "I'm trying to figure you out." "Good luck with that." Chit. He poured himself an espresso from the machine in the corner. "Most days I can't figure myself out." "Why did you believe me?" The question had been nagging at her for weeks. "At the party. You didn't know me. You had no reason to trust me. But you stopped drinking the wine." Dario was quiet for a moment, his back to her as he doctored his espresso with sugar. "You want the truth?" "Always." "I almost didn't believe you. My first instinct was to have you removed and forget it happened." He turned to face her, leaning against the counter. "But then I looked at your face, really looked, and I saw someone who was absolutely terrified but doing it anyway. That kind of fear doesn't come from wanting attention or pulling a prank." "I could have been a very good actress." "You're not, though. You're possibly the worst liar I've ever met." He smiled slightly. "It's one of your more endearing qualities." Before Alina could figure out how to respond to that, Sofia burst into the room, her expression grim. "We found something," she said. "About the car accident." They gathered in the conference room again. Dario, Sofia, Luca, and Alina. Marco stood by the door, his usual silent sentinel position. Sofia pulled up files on the large monitor, and Alina's heart sank as she recognized the police report from her parents' accident. "The official story was brake failure," Sofia began. "Your father's car went off the road on a curve, hit a tree. Both parents died on impact. The police investigation concluded it was mechanical failure, possibly due to poor maintenance." "My father maintained that car religiously," Alina said. "He was obsessive about it." "I know, which is why this caught our attention." Sofia zoomed in on a section of the mechanic's report. The inspector noted that the brake lines showed signs of tampering, specific cuts that looked deliberate rather than wear-related. But when the police followed up, the same mechanic reversed his statement. Said he'd been mistaken, that the damage was consistent with age and use. "Someone paid him off," Dario said flatly. "We think so." The mechanic deposited 15,000 euros in cash 2 days after changing his statement. No explanation, no paper trail. Alina's hands were shaking. She clasped them together in her lap, forcing herself to stay focused. "Can you prove it?" "The mechanic died 4 years ago. Heart attack." Luca pulled up another document. "But we found something else. Phone records from the week before your parents' accident. Your father made multiple calls to a lawyer, someone named Pietro Russo. We tracked down Russo. He's retired now, living in Naples. Took some convincing, but he agreed to talk to us." Sofia pressed play on an audio file. A man's voice filled the room, elderly but clear. "The Morettis came to me because they'd discovered something about their loans. They'd been going through old paperwork, trying to understand why their debt kept growing despite regular payments. What they found were discrepancies, charges that weren't in the original contract, fees that appeared out of nowhere. They wanted to sue Meridian Holdings." Sofia paused the recording. "This was 2 weeks before they died." She pressed play again. "I told them they had a case, not a strong one. Meridian's lawyers were very good, but enough to cause problems. We were preparing to file when they died. After the accident, I received a visit from 2 men. They didn't threaten me directly, but they made it clear that pursuing the case would be unwise. I dropped it. I'm not proud of that, but I have a family. I chose their safety over justice for the Morettis." The recording ended. The room was silent except for the hum of the monitor. Alina stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She walked to the window, needing to put distance between herself and the evidence of what had been done to her family. Behind her, she heard Dario murmur something to the others. Footsteps retreated. A door closed. When she finally turned around, only Dario remained. "I want their names," she said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, cold and flat, nothing like the person she used to be. Everyone involved, everyone who knew, everyone who helped. "We're working on it, but Alina..." "Don't." She held up a hand. "Don't tell me to be patient. Don't tell me these things take time. My parents were murdered because they tried to fight back against people who were stealing from us. My grandmother worked herself to death trying to pay off debt that was designed to be unpayable. And I spent 5 years thinking it was just bad luck." Dario crossed the room to stand in front of her. He didn't touch her, didn't try to comfort her, just stood there as a solid presence while she fought to control the rage threatening to consume her. "I'm not going to tell you to be patient," he said quietly. "I'm going to tell you to be smart. Anger is useful, but only if you channel it into something productive." "What do you suggest?" "Help me finish what you started. Serena's conspiracy is bigger than we initially thought. We've identified 11 people involved. Family heads, business partners, even a few politicians. They weren't just trying to kill me, they were planning a complete restructuring of how the families operate." "Why do I care about your power struggles?" "Because the Valentis were part of it. Because Serena's father is cooperating, which means he's giving us access to decades of files, including everything related to Meridian Holdings and their targets." Dario's eyes held hers. "You want justice for your family? Help me take apart the entire system that destroyed them." It should have felt wrong. Should have felt like losing herself, like becoming something she'd never wanted to be. But standing there in that conference room, looking at the evidence of her parents' murder laid out on screens and in files, Alina couldn't find it in herself to care about shoulds and shouldn'ts. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. The answer turned out to be everything she was terrified of. Over the next week, Alina sat in on meetings with people who made her skin crawl. She watched Dario negotiate with family heads whose empires were built on suffering. She learned to keep her expression neutral when they discussed violence like it was weather, unfortunate but inevitable. She also learned that Dario was trying to change things, slowly, carefully, in ways that wouldn't get him killed. "The old model is dying," he explained one night after a particularly brutal 12-hour session. They were alone in his actual office, not the conference room, but his private space filled with books and art that suggested depths she was only beginning to understand. "My father's generation built their power on extortion and intimidation. But that world is disappearing. Technology makes it harder to hide. International cooperation makes it harder to run. The smart families are diversifying, legitimate businesses, legal income streams. Laundering money through legitimate businesses isn't exactly reform," Alina pointed out. "No, but it's a step. You can't turn a cargo ship on a dime. You have to do it gradually." He poured them both wine, checked for poison first, which had become a dark joke between them. "Some of the families understand this. Others, like Serena, think I'm destroying everything our fathers built. They're not entirely wrong." "So you're what? The reformer crime lord?" Dario laughed, genuinely amused. "When you put it like that, it sounds ridiculous." "It is ridiculous. Maybe, but it's also necessary." He handed her a glass. "The violence has to end eventually. The question is whether we end it ourselves or wait for governments to do it for us. I prefer controlling my own obsolescence." Alina sipped the wine, thinking, is that why Serena wanted you dead, because you're making the families go legitimate? Partly, but it's more complicated than that. There's money in chaos. When families are fighting each other, certain people profit. Arms dealers, corrupt officials, fixers who make problems disappear. Serena had connections to all of them. My reforms threatened their income. So they decided to eliminate the threat. They tried. Dario's smile was sharp. They failed. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday afternoon. Luca burst into the conference room where Alina was reviewing financial documents with Sofia, his laptop clutched against his chest, and his eyes bright with discovery. "I found it," he said breathlessly. "The connection. All of it." He set up the laptop and started pulling up files faster than Alina could follow. Sofia leaned in, her expression sharpening as she scanned the information. Meridian Holdings was a subsidiary of a larger entity called Corona Investments, Luca explained, his words tumbling over each other. Corona was owned by a partnership between the Valenti family and the Corsi family. But here's where it gets interesting. The Corsis also owned the development company that bought your restaurant after your grandmother died. They profited twice, Sophia said. Once from the predatory loans, again from the property flip. It's worse than that. Oh, Luca pulled up a new spreadsheet. I cross-referenced all 47 properties targeted by Meridian Holdings. 31 of them were eventually purchased by Corsi development companies. The remaining 16 went to other buyers who turned out to be shell corporations also controlled by the Corsis. They owned the entire pipeline, Alina said slowly, understanding dawning. The lending company, the development companies, the whole thing. Exactly. And look at the timeline. Luca highlighted a series of dates. The operation started in 2008, right after the financial crisis. Property values were depressed, small businesses were struggling. The Corsis saw an opportunity and created a system to exploit it. Who ran it? Dario had entered without Alina noticing, Marco behind him as always. Who made the decisions? Best we can tell? A man named Vittorio Corsi. I know who he is. Dario's voice had gone cold. He's Serena's uncle, her mother's brother. The pieces slid together. Alina felt something click in her chest, rage crystallizing into focus. Serena knew, she said. About the loans, the property seizures, all of it. She wasn't just planning your assassination, she was protecting the family business. And now she's in my custody, which means we have leverage. Dario pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. Vittorio Corsi is currently in Rome, Marco. I want him brought here, quietly. No violence unless absolutely necessary. Boss. Marco's voice held a warning. The Corsis aren't going to just hand him over. This could start a war. Then we'd better be convincing. Dario looked at Sophia. Pull everything we have on Corsi family operations, every questionable deal, every bribed official, every skeleton in every closet, and get our lawyers ready. We're going to make Vittorio an offer he'll understand. What kind of offer? Alina asked. Dario's smile was cold enough to frost glass, the kind where he chooses between cooperating and watching his entire empire collapse around him. The operation to extract Vittorio Corsi took 3 days of careful planning. Alina wasn't directly involved. Dario made that clear. You're useful, but you're not trained for this, he said bluntly. Stay here, stay safe, and let the professionals handle it. She hated it, but she understood. So she spent those 3 days with Luca and Sophia building the case against Vittorio Corsi. They compiled evidence of fraud, racketeering, money laundering, and at least 3 suspicious deaths connected to his business interests. By the time Marco returned with their target, they had enough documentation to bury him. Vittorio Corsi was in his late 60s, silver-haired and elegant in the way of men who'd spent their lives among the powerful. He arrived at the warehouse escorted by 4 of Dario's men, his expression more annoyed than frightened. This is a mistake, Vitale, he said as they sat him down in the conference room. My family will not tolerate this kind of... Your family is currently weighing whether you're worth starting a war over. Dario dropped a thick folder on the table in front of him. Read it, then we'll talk about tolerance. Alina watched from behind one-way glass as Vittorio opened the folder. She saw his expression change as he flipped through pages, initial dismissal shifting to concern, then to something that might have been fear. Where did you get this? He asked finally. Does it matter? The question is what happens next. You can't prove half of these allegations. I don't need to prove them. I just need to make them public. Dario leaned back in his chair, the picture of casual control. The Meridian holding scheme alone is enough to trigger multiple investigations. Federal prosecutors love cases like this. Sophisticated fraud targeting small business owners. Very sympathetic victims. And once they start digging, well, you know how these things go. Vittorio's jaw tightened. What do you want? Information. Full disclosure of every property targeted by Meridian Holdings, every partner involved, every official who looked the other way. That would destroy I know what it would destroy. That's the point. Dario's voice hardened. You and your partners built an empire on stealing from people who couldn't fight back. You murdered anyone who tried, and you did it all behind a wall of legal paperwork and political connections. I'm going to tear that wall down. Why? What do you gain? Justice isn't about gain. Vittorio laughed, harsh and disbelieving. Since when do you care about justice? You're a crime lord. Your hands are as dirty as mine. Maybe, but I'm trying to change that. You're trying to protect it. Dario stood. You have 24 hours to decide. Cooperate fully, and I'll ensure your exposure is limited. Fight me. and I'll make sure every piece of evidence ends up in the hands of prosecutors who actually care. He walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Vittorio? The Moretti family? The restaurant you helped destroy? The parents who died suspiciously after filing a complaint? He gestured toward the glass where Alina stood watching. Their daughter is standing right there. You might want to include that in your calculations. The color drained from Vittorio's face. Alina met his eyes through the glass, letting him see exactly what she was feeling. No anger, no rage, just cold, patient determination. The look of someone who would wait as long as necessary to see justice done. Vittorio Corsi broke in 18 hours. He didn't just cooperate, he vomited information, desperate to save whatever he could of his life and legacy. Names, dates, bank accounts, properties. He confirmed that Alina's parents' accident had been arranged by a contractor who specialized in making problems disappear. He admitted that the mechanic had been paid off. He even provided documentation showing exactly how the loans had been structured to be unpayable. The restaurant could have been profitable, he said at one point, his voice hollow. The Morettis were good operators, but the location was too valuable. We needed them gone. Alina stood in the observation room, watching this man casually discuss her family's destruction like it was a business decision. Sophia stood beside her, silent support. How do you feel? Sophia asked quietly. Empty, Alina said. And it was true. She'd expected rage or satisfaction or something, but all she felt was a vast hollowness where her illusions used to be. I thought understanding why would help. It doesn't. No, it usually doesn't. How do you do this? Alina turned to look at Sophia. Work in this world, see this kind of thing, and not lose yourself. Sophia was quiet for a moment. I focus on what I can fix. I can't bring back your parents, can't undo what happened to your family, but I can make sure the people responsible pay for it. That has to be enough, because it's all we have. In the conference room, Dario was wrapping up the interview. Vittorio looked 20 years older than when they'd started, his elegant facade completely shattered. One more thing, Dario said. Serena's conspiracy. Who else knew about it? I didn't. Don't lie to me. Not now. Vittorio slumped in his chair. She came to me 6 months ago. Said you were destroying everything, that someone had to stop you. I told her it was a mistake, that you were too careful, but she had partners. The Russos, the De Luca family, some politicians whose names I never learned. I didn't know about the poison until after it failed. But you knew she was planning something. I knew she was angry. I didn't know she'd go that far. Dario studied him for a long moment, then nodded to Marco. Get him a lawyer, a good one. He's going to need it when we turn this over to the prosecutors. You said you'd limit my exposure. I said I'd ensure it was limited, which I will. You'll go to prison, but probably not for life. Considering the alternative, you should be grateful. They left Vittorio sitting in the conference room, his world crumbling around him. Outside, Dario found Alina standing by the window, looking out over the Palermo harbor. The sun was setting, turning the water copper and gold. It's not enough, she said without turning around. He goes to prison, maybe serves 10 years if he's unlucky. My parents are still dead. My grandmother still worked herself to death. The restaurant is still gone. I know. So what's the point? The point, Dario said quietly, is that he doesn't get to do it to anyone else. The point is that the system that allowed this gets exposed and dismantled. The point is that 47 families might finally get answers about what happened to them. He moved to stand beside her. It's not enough. It's never enough. But it's something. Alina was quiet for a long time, watching the ships move in and out of the harbor. Finally, she asked, What happens to me now? That's up to you. Is it? She looked at him. I know too much. I've seen too much. Can I actually just walk away? You can if you want. I'll make sure you're protected, that you have resources to start over somewhere safe. That's not what I asked. Dario met her eyes. No, you probably can't just walk away. Not completely. You'll always know what you know, always see the world the way you see it now. That doesn't go away. So my choices are what? Work for you or spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder? Those aren't your only choices. He turned to face her fully. You could work with me, not for me. There's a difference. What kind of difference? The kind where you have a say in what happens next, where you help decide how we use Vittorio's information, how we expose the system, what we build to replace it. He paused. I'm not offering you a job, Alina. I'm offering you a partnership. She stared at him, trying to read the truth behind the offer. Why? Because you walked onto that terrace and saved my life when you had every reason to let me die. Because you've spent the last month learning this world faster than anyone I've ever seen. Because you see things clearly. No romanticizing, no excuses, just hard truth. He smiled slightly. And because I think we could actually change something together. Change what? You can't reform organized crime. That's an oxymoron. Maybe, or maybe we can build something different. Use the resources and connections for something that actually helps people instead of destroying them. He gestured to the files piled on the nearby desk. We have Vittorio's complete records, 47 businesses destroyed. What if we use that information to help the survivors? Return properties, compensate families, rebuild what was stolen? That's not how this world works. Then maybe it's time to change how this world works. Alina wanted to dismiss it as naive fantasy, but she'd seen Dario negotiate, had watched him maneuver through situations that should have ended in bloodshed and somehow emerge with peaceful solutions. She'd seen him threaten and bribe and manipulate, but also seen him choose mercy when violence would have been easier. I'm not like you, she said. I don't know how to navigate this world. I don't know how to make decisions that affect thousands of people. I'm just what? Just a waitress who stopped an assassination? Just someone who figured out a conspiracy that half my intelligence people missed? Dario shook his head. You keep seeing yourself as small, but you're not. You never were. You just needed a reason to stop hiding. The words hit harder than they should have. Alina thought about her life before the terrace. Working 3 jobs, keeping her head down, surviving but never actually living. She'd been invisible by choice as much as by circumstance, telling herself it was safety when really it was fear. If I do this, she said slowly, if I stay and work with you, I need conditions. Name them. The information about the Meridian Holdings victims. I want to be part of deciding how it gets used. Those are real people whose lives were destroyed. They deserve better than becoming collateral damage in your reform project. Agreed. And I want regular updates on the investigation into my parents' death. No hiding things from me, no protecting me from difficult truths. You'll get everything we find when we find it. And she took a breath. I want to learn, really learn, not just the financial stuff, everything. How to read people, how to negotiate, how to protect myself. If I'm going to be part of this world, I'm not going to be helpless in it. Dario smiled, genuine warmth breaking through his usual careful control. Now we're talking. Sophia can teach you the legal strategies, Luca the financial analysis, Marco can handle the physical security training. And you? I'll teach you the most important skill, how to see the game before you're playing it. Alina extended her hand. Partners then. He took it, his grip firm and warm. Partners. As they shook on it, Alina felt the last piece of her old life fall away. She'd spent 5 years trying to hold on to her grandmother's legacy, fighting to maintain a connection to a family that was already gone. But standing here in this office, overlooking a harbor in a city that had destroyed and remade itself 1,000 times, she realized something fundamental. The legacy wasn't a building. It wasn't a restaurant or a location or even a set of recipes. The legacy was the fight itself, the refusal to accept that some people deserved to suffer while others profited from their pain. Her grandmother had fought that battle and lost. But maybe, just maybe, Alina could fight it differently, fight it smarter. And maybe, with the right partner, she could even win. The first test of their partnership came faster than Alina expected. She was 3 weeks into what Dario called her comprehensive education, which mostly meant being thrown into situations she wasn't remotely prepared for and expected to figure them out. Sophia had her analyzing contracts until her eyes crossed. Luca taught her to spot financial manipulation in spreadsheets that looked perfectly legitimate. Marco, surprisingly patient, showed her how to read a room for threats, how to position herself near exits, how to recognize when someone was carrying a weapon. And Dario? Dario took her to meetings. You learn by watching, he'd said on the first day. Keep your mouth shut, your eyes open, and pay attention to what people don't say. That's where the real information lives. So she watched. She sat in corners of conference rooms and back offices, and once, memorably, a seafood restaurant that served as neutral ground for a territorial dispute. She watched Dario negotiate with people who smiled while threatening murder. She watched him diffuse situations that should have exploded into violence. She watched him lie, manipulate, and occasionally tell devastating truths that left his opponent scrambling. What surprised her most was how often he chose the peaceful option, not out of weakness. She'd seen enough to know he could be brutal when necessary, but he seemed to view violence as a failure of imagination, a last resort when cleverness ran out. Most people in this world mistake cruelty for strength, he explained after one particularly tense negotiation. They think fear is the only currency that matters, but fear is expensive. It requires constant maintenance, constant escalation. Respect is cheaper in the long run. Is that what you have, respect? Some days. Other days I have fear dressed up as respect, which amounts to the same thing. He'd smiled at her expression. I'm not a good man, Alina. Don't make the mistake of thinking I am. I'm just trying to be a smarter bad man than my father was. The philosophy was tested when news broke about Vittorio Corsi's arrest. The federal prosecutors moved fast once they had Sofia's carefully curated evidence. Vittorio was charged with fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit murder. The media picked up the story immediately. Prominent businessman arrested, decades of financial crimes exposed, victims coming forward with stories of destroyed lives and stolen futures. It should have been a victory. It was, technically. But it also painted a target on everyone involved. The Corsi family is furious, Marco reported during an emergency meeting 2 days after the arrest. They're calling it a setup, saying we manufactured evidence to destroy a competitor. Let them talk, Dario said. The evidence speaks for itself. They're doing more than talking. We've had 3 attempts to breach our security in the last 48 hours. Nothing serious yet, but they're probing for weaknesses. Alina felt her stomach tighten. She'd known there would be consequences, but the abstract idea of danger felt very different from the reality of people actively trying to hurt them. Dario noticed her expression. Marco, give us a minute? After the door closed, he turned to face her. Second thoughts? About which part? Any of it. This isn't a game, and I should have made that clear before you committed. The Corsis aren't going to forgive what we did to Vittorio. Neither are the other families who profited from his schemes. What are they going to do? Try to undermine me. Spread rumors that I'm working with federal prosecutors, that I'm betraying the families to save myself. Some will believe it. Others will use it as an excuse to challenge my authority. He moved to the window, looking out over the city. There's a meeting tomorrow night. The major families gathering to discuss the Vittorio situation. They'll want explanations. Are you going? I have to. Not going would look like weakness, and weakness gets you killed. He glanced back at her. You should stay here, where it's safe. No. Alina, you said we're partners. Partners don't hide when things get difficult. She stood, moving to join him by the window. Besides, you're going to need someone watching your back. You said it yourself. Half these families want you gone. You walk into that room alone. You're making it easy for them. I won't be alone. I'll have Marco and you'll have guards. That's not the same as having someone who sees the game before you're playing it. She used his own words back at him, watching his expression shift. Isn't that what you said you'd teach me? Dario was quiet for a long moment. Then he laughed, surprising her. You're either going to get us both killed or change everything. I haven't decided which yet. Can it be both? With you? Probably. The meeting was held in a private estate outside Palermo, the kind of place that looked like a villa from a tourism magazine but functioned as a fortress. Alina counted 6 security checkpoints before they even reached the main building. Marco drove, his expression grim, while 2 other cars filled with Dario's people followed at a careful distance. The Russos will be there, Dario said, reviewing notes on his tablet. They lost the most when Vittorio got arrested. He was their primary financial partner. Expect them to be hostile. The De Lucas will probably stay neutral unless they see an advantage in picking a side. The Greco family owes me a favor, but that only goes so far. And the Corsis? Salvatore Corsi, Vittorio's brother, will be there. He'll want blood, but he's smart enough to know he can't move against me directly. Not yet. Dario set down the tablet. The key is keeping everyone talking long enough to see that Vittorio's arrest actually benefits them. How does it benefit them? Because the federal investigation is focused on Vittorio's schemes, not the families as a whole. If they cooperate with the narrative that he was a rogue operator, they stay clean. If they defend him, they invite scrutiny they don't want. Alina turned that over in her mind. You're giving them a way to throw Vittorio under the bus and call it justice. Exactly. That's cold. That's survival. Dario looked at her, his expression serious. Vittorio destroyed your family. He murdered your parents. I'm not asking you to forgive him, But I am asking you to be smart about how we handle this. Burning everything down might feel satisfying, but it won't bring them back. Building something better might actually honor their memory. The words stung because they were true. Alina wanted Vittorio to suffer, wanted everyone who'd helped him to pay. But Dario was right. Pure revenge wouldn't change anything. It would just create more victims. Okay, she said, we play it smart. But if Salvatore Corsi tries something, then we respond appropriately. But we don't start the violence. We're better than that. The estate's main hall was exactly what Alina expected. Old money and older power dressed up as respectability. Crystal chandeliers, Renaissance paintings, furniture that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. About 30 people were already present, clustered in small groups that spoke volumes about current alliances. The Russos stood together near the bar, 3 men in expensive suits who radiated barely controlled anger. The De Lucas occupied a corner, watching everything with the careful neutrality of people waiting to see who won before committing. And near the center of the room, holding court like a king at his own coronation, stood Salvatore Corsi. He was older than Vittorio, but carried it better. Still fit, still sharp-eyed, still dangerous. When Dario entered, Salvatore's expression didn't change, but Alina saw his hand tighten around his whiskey glass. "Vitale," he said, his voice carrying across the room, "how generous of you to join us." "Salvatore, my condolences about your brother." "Are they? Condolences? Or congratulations on a competitor eliminated?" The room went quiet. Alina felt Marco tense beside her, ready for violence. But Dario just smiled, easy and unconcerned. "Vittorio eliminated himself," he said. "I just made sure the evidence reached the right people. Evidence you manufactured. Evidence that's been verified by federal forensic accountants. Evidence that includes testimony from dozens of victims. Evidence that your brother confirmed in his own words." Dario moved further into the room, commanding attention without seeming to try. "If you want to be angry at someone, Salvatore, be angry at Vittorio for being sloppy enough to get caught. He was family. He was a liability, and deep down you know it." Dario accepted a drink from a passing server, checked it first, Alina noticed, and turned to address the room. "We all built our organizations on certain foundations. Some of those foundations are cracking. We can either shore them up or watch them collapse and take us down with them." One of the Russos stepped forward, his face flushed with anger or alcohol or both. "You're the crack in the foundation, Vitale. Your reforms, your legitimate business obsession, your cooperation with prosecutors." "My cooperation?" Dario's voice went cold. "I handed over evidence of crimes that threatened all of us. Vittorio's schemes weren't just destroying small businesses. They were creating a paper trail that led directly to family operations. Every property seizure, every fraudulent loan, every suspicious death, it all connected back to us. The Federals were already investigating. I just gave them a clean target that wasn't the rest of us." "He's right." The voice came from an older man Alina didn't recognize, someone from the Greco family based on where he was standing. "My lawyers have been warning me for months that the Meridian Holdings operation was too visible. Too many victims willing to talk. Too much documentation. It was only a matter of time before it blew up in our faces." "So we sacrificed Vittorio to save ourselves?" Salvatore's voice dripped contempt. "That's your solution?" "My solution is to stop doing business in ways that invite federal attention," Dario said. "The world is changing. The old methods don't work anymore. We either adapt or we die. Vittorio refused to adapt. He paid the price. And what about loyalty? What about protecting our own? I protect people who deserve protection. Vittorio murdered innocent people to steal their property. He created a system that destroyed dozens of families for profit. That's not business. That's just cruelty with paperwork." Dario's eyes swept the room. "Any of you want to defend that publicly? Want to stand up and say that kind of operation deserves our protection?" Silence. Alina watched the faces around the room, saw people calculating, weighing their options. No one wanted to defend Vittorio's actions out loud, but no one wanted to look weak by abandoning him either. That's when she understood what Dario was doing. He wasn't trying to convince them Vittorio was guilty. They already knew that. He was giving them permission to admit it, to distance themselves before the scandal touched them too. It was brilliant and ruthless in equal measure. "There's another consideration," Sophia said, stepping forward for the first time. She'd been so quiet, Alina had almost forgotten she was there. "The federal investigation is ongoing. They have Vittorio's records, his testimony, his complete operational history. Right now, that investigation is focused solely on him and his direct partners. But if the narrative becomes the family's protected a criminal, that focus will expand significantly. Is that a threat? One of the DeLucas asked. It's a fact. The prosecutors want convictions. They'll take whatever targets we give them. Right now, we're offering them Vittorio Corsi and a few corrupt officials. We can keep it that way, or we can make it a war. Your choice. The calculation shifted again. Alina could almost see it happening, anger giving way to pragmatism, revenge losing out to survival instinct. Salvatore Corsi set down his drink with careful precision. And what happens to my family's assets, the properties, the businesses Vittorio controlled? That depends, Dario said. Cooperate with the investigation, help us clean up the mess, and we can probably protect most of it. Fight us, and it all gets seized as evidence. The choice is yours. It wasn't really a choice, and everyone in the room knew it. But Dario had phrased it like one anyway, giving Salvatore a way to surrender without losing face. The Corsi patriarch was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded, just once. I'll need guarantees, written agreements about what gets protected and what doesn't. Sophia will work with your lawyers. We'll have something drafted by tomorrow. And my brother? What happens to him? He faces the consequences of his actions. I'm sorry, Salvatore, but some things can't be fixed. Salvatore's jaw tightened, but he nodded again. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by the weary acceptance of someone who knew when they'd lost. The rest of the meeting was details. Negotiations about assets, discussions of how to present the situation to lower-ranking family members, agreements about maintaining the narrative that Vittorio had acted alone. It was all very civilized, very professional, very much like watching vultures divide up a corpse. Alina stood against the wall, trying to process what she was watching. These people were discussing her parents' murderer like he was a business problem to be managed. They were protecting their interests, their wealth, their power, and Dario was helping them do it. She must have shown something on her face because Marco leaned close and murmured, "Don't judge too harshly. Sometimes you have to work with what you've got." "He's letting them get away with it," she whispered back. All of them knew what Vittorio was doing. Some of them probably helped. And now they're just going to walk away clean? No, they're going to walk away contained. There's a difference. Marco's expression was grave. The boss could push harder, could try to burn them all down. But that would start a war that would kill dozens of people and probably accomplish nothing. This way, Vittorio pays, the system gets exposed, and the families get a lesson about what happens when they cross certain lines. It's not perfect justice, but it's real justice, which is messier. Alina wanted to argue, but she couldn't find the words. Because Marco was right. Perfect justice didn't exist. It was a fairy tale, the kind of thing her grandmother used to believe in before the world taught her otherwise. The meeting ended around midnight. Dario worked the room on his way out, shaking hands and accepting acknowledgments that looked like deference but felt more like relief. He'd given them an out, and they were grateful for it, even if they'd never say so out loud. In the car heading back, Dario was quiet. He stared out the window at the Sicilian countryside sliding past, his expression unreadable. "You did well tonight," he said finally, not looking at her. "I didn't do anything." "You watched. You learned. You didn't let your anger show when Salvatore talked about your parents' killer like he was a victim." He turned to face her. "That took discipline. I'm impressed." "I wanted to stab him with a fork." Dario laughed, genuinely startled. "I would have paid to see that." "Marco said you were being strategic, containing the damage instead of trying to punish everyone involved. Marco's smarter than he looks." Dario's smile faded. "I meant what I said at the estate. Vittorio destroyed your family. He deserves worse than prison. But going after everyone who helped him, everyone who looked the other way, that wouldn't bring your parents back. It would just create more chaos, more violence, more victims. Sometimes the smart play is knowing when to stop. It doesn't feel like justice." "No, it feels like compromise. But that's what building something new requires. You can't tear down the whole structure while you're still inside it. You have to be more careful than that." Alina thought about her grandmother again, about how she'd fought the debt with everything she had, refusing to compromise or give up or admit defeat. It had killed her. Slowly, painfully, but just as surely as if Vittorio had pulled a trigger. Maybe there was courage in knowing when to work within the system instead of against it. Maybe wisdom wasn't about being right, it was about being effective. "Teach me," she said abruptly. Dario raised an eyebrow. "Teach you what?" How to do what you did tonight. How to read a room. How to give people what they want while getting what you need. How to make compromise look like victory. She met his eyes. You said you'd teach me to see the game before I'm playing it. I'm ready to learn. Something shifted in Dario's expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. All right, but it's not going to be easy, and you're not going to like some of the lessons. I haven't liked much of anything since I kissed you to save your life. Might as well commit. He smiled at that, wide and genuine. Fair enough. We start tomorrow. The lessons began before sunrise. Dario pulled her out of bed at 5 in the morning, handed her coffee, and dragged her to a gym she didn't know existed, tucked into the basement of one of his legitimate businesses. Marco was already there, working a heavy bag with the kind of focused intensity that made it clear this wasn't optional. Physical fitness first, Dario said, ignoring her protests. You can't think clearly if your body is weak. Can't defend yourself if you've never learned how. And you definitely can't project confidence if you're exhausted all the time. I'm exhausted right now, Alina pointed out. Then we'll fix that. What followed was 6 weeks of the most brutal routine Alina had ever experienced. Every morning started with physical training, cardio, strength work, defensive techniques that Marco taught with patient ruthlessness. Then breakfast with Dario, during which he'd quiz her on news articles, asking her to identify the subtext, the real agendas behind public statements. The mayor announced new development initiatives in the Port District, he'd say, showing her a newspaper. What's really happening? He's clearing space for new construction? He's forcing out current businesses so his campaign donors can buy the property cheap. Look at the timeline. The announcement came 2 days after a major donor purchased a development company. That's not coincidence, that's coordination. After breakfast came meetings. Alina sat in on negotiations, contract reviews, strategy sessions. Dario would pause periodically to quiz her. What did you notice about how Russo phrased his offer? He seemed uncertain. He was fishing. He doesn't know what we know, so he's making vague offers to see how we respond, which means we have more leverage than he does. How do we use that? Make him specify first? Exactly. Make him commit before we show our hand. It was exhausting and exhilarating and occasionally terrifying. Alina learned to spot lies in body language, read financial statements like stories, understand how power flowed through networks of obligation and debt. She learned which families were rising and which were falling, who owed whom favors, where the real power lived versus where it appeared to live. And slowly, she began to understand why Dario operated the way he did. You're playing a longer game than anyone else, she said one afternoon after a particularly complex negotiation. Everyone else is thinking about the next quarter, the next year. You're thinking decades ahead. Someone has to. The families are dying. They just don't know it yet. The question is whether they die violently, taking innocent people with them, or whether they transform into something sustainable. He pulled up a map of Palermo, marked with dozens of colored pins. Every pin is a business I've helped transition from illegal to legitimate operations. Former gambling fronts that are now restaurants. Loan sharking operations that became legitimate lending companies. Money laundering networks that turned into actual investment firms. Is the money really clean if it came from crime originally? No, but the jobs are real. The tax revenue is real. The fact that these businesses now function without destroying people's lives is real. He met her eyes. Perfect doesn't exist, Alina. We work with what we have and try to make it better. That's all anyone can do. The philosophy was tested a month into her training when one of the Russo family's operations got raided by police. News came through Marco just after dawn. Alina was finishing her morning workout, drenched in sweat and contemplating death, when he burst into the gym. We have a problem. The Russos got hit. Federal task force raided their warehouse operation. 20 people arrested, including Pietro Russo's son. Dario, who'd been spotting Alina on bench press, straightened immediately. What were they moving? Pharmaceuticals, unmarked, probably stolen. The shipment was worth about $3 million. Idiots. Dario's expression darkened. I warned Pietro 6 months ago to get out of that business. The regulatory attention alone makes it too risky. That's not the problem. Marco pulled up something on his phone, showed it to Dario. The Russos are claiming we tipped off the Federals, that this is retaliation for them questioning your handling of the Vittorio situation. Alina watched Dario's face go carefully blank, the expression he wore when he was furious but couldn't afford to show it. That's a serious accusation. They're serious about it. Pietro's already called a meeting. Tonight. He wants you there to answer the charges. Of course he does. Dario set down the weight bar he'd been holding. He needs a scapegoat, and I'm convenient. If he can convince the other families I'm cooperating with prosecutors, he undermines everything we've built. He looked at Marco. Get Sofia. We need to prepare a defense. Or, Alina said quietly, we could go on offense. Both men turned to look at her. Explain, Dario said. Alina grabbed a towel, wiping sweat from her face while she organized her thoughts. Pietro's lying, we know that. But he's lying because he's desperate. His son just got arrested, his operation just got destroyed. He needs someone to blame that isn't himself. What if instead of defending ourselves against his accusation, we attack the real problem? Which is? That he was running a pharmaceutical operation 6 months after you warned him it was too risky. That he ignored your advice and now he's trying to make his failure your fault. She moved closer, warming to the idea. You said the families need to understand that the old ways don't work anymore. This is a perfect example. Pietro did exactly what you told him not to do, and he got burned. Use that. Dario was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he smiled. You're getting dangerous. Is that a yes? That's a, we need to think this through carefully. But yes, the core idea is sound. He pulled out his phone, started typing. Sofia, I need you to pull everything we have on Pietro Russo's pharmaceutical operation. Every warning we gave him, every piece of advice he ignored. And get me the arrest reports from this morning. I want to know exactly what the federals found. The meeting that night was smaller than the one at Salvatore's estate, but somehow more tense. Just the major family heads and their closest advisors gathered in a private room at a restaurant that served as neutral ground. Pietro Russo stood at one end of the table, his face haggard with stress and rage. You sold out my son, he said the moment Dario walked in. No preamble, no pleasantries. You handed federal prosecutors enough information to destroy my operation. That's a fascinating theory, Dario said calmly, taking his seat. What evidence do you have? The timing. The raid happened exactly when you knew we'd be moving product. The Federals went straight to the right warehouse, knew exactly what they were looking for. That's not coincidence. You're right. It's not coincidence. It's stupidity. Dario pulled out a tablet, started pulling up documents. 6 months ago, I sent you a detailed analysis of why pharmaceutical operations were becoming too risky. Increased regulatory scrutiny, new federal task forces, enhanced cooperation between international law enforcement. I recommended shutting down the operation and transitioning to legitimate medical supply distribution. I'm not taking business advice from someone who's trying to turn us all into shopkeepers. Then take a lesson from someone who's been doing this longer than you. Dario turned the tablet to show the room. This is the Federal Task Force's press release about this morning's raid. Notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't mention any of us by name. It doesn't reference organized crime. It's framed entirely as a pharmaceutical theft and distribution operation. They're treating it like a standalone criminal enterprise. One of the DeLucas leaned forward, studying the document. So if Dario had given them information, they'd have used it differently, Sofia said, picking up the thread. They'd have made this about organized crime, about the families. Instead, it's just about pharmaceutical theft, which means they got their information from somewhere else. Where? Pietro demanded. My guess? Someone in your operation talked, or the Federals tracked the pharmaceuticals from their source, or they followed the money. Dario shrugged. But here's what I know for certain. I had nothing to do with it, and frankly, I'm insulted you think I'd be that sloppy. If I wanted to destroy your operation, Pietro, you wouldn't see it coming until it was already done. The room was quiet. Alina watched faces, reading reactions. Some people believed Dario. Others were reserving judgment. But no one looked convinced by Pietro's accusations anymore. My son is facing federal charges, Pietro said, his voice cracking slightly. 20 years minimum. And you expect me to believe it's just bad luck? I expect you to believe it's the consequence of ignoring good advice. Dario's tone softened fractionally. I'm sorry about your son. Truly. But this is exactly what I've been warning all of you about. The world is changing. The methods that worked for our fathers don't work anymore. We either adapt or we end up in federal prison. Your choice. Pietro slumped in his chair, the fight draining out of him. He looked older suddenly, diminished. A father watching his son pay for his mistakes. What am I supposed to do? He asked quietly. Get him a good lawyer, cooperate with the investigation enough to keep the focus on the theft rather than the distribution network, and shut down any other operations that invite this kind of attention. Dario paused. I can help with that, if you want. It was a lifeline, and everyone in the room knew it. Pietro looked at Dario for a long moment, something complicated moving across his face. Then he nodded. All right, we'll talk, after this is settled. The meeting ended shortly after, the tension bleeding away into exhausted acceptance. As they left, one of the Greco representatives caught Dario's arm. You handled that well, better than expected. Thank you. But you should know, not everyone is convinced. Some people think you're changing things too fast, pushing too hard. They're scared of what comes next. I know, but scared people make bad decisions. I'd rather push forward than wait for them to push back. In the car heading home, Alina finally let herself relax, the adrenaline of the confrontation fading into bone-deep exhaustion. You were right, Dario said, breaking the silence. Going on offense was the right call. Pietro had nothing but suspicion and anger. We had evidence and a coherent narrative. The outcome was never in doubt. It felt in doubt, Alina admitted. Only because you haven't done this enough yet. Give it time. Eventually you'll be able to read these situations before they even start. He glanced at her. How do you feel? Tired? Wired, like I just ran a marathon. That's normal. The first few times are always the hardest. Your body doesn't know the difference between actual danger and perceived danger. But you'll learn to manage it. Alina watched the city slide past outside the window, lights reflecting off the Mediterranean in the distance. A month ago, she'd been a waitress trying to survive. Now she was sitting in a crime lord's car, coming back from a meeting where she'd helped defuse a potential war between families. The transformation should have felt wrong, should have felt like losing herself. Instead, it felt like waking up. Dario? She said quietly. Yeah? Thank you for teaching me this, for trusting me enough to try. He was quiet for a moment, then, You're welcome. But Alina, you should know something. What? I'm not doing this just to be nice. I'm doing it because I think you might actually be better at this than I am. You see things clearly. You're not weighed down by family loyalty or tradition or any of the bullshit that makes people stupid. You just see the truth and act on it. He met her eyes. That's rare. That's valuable. And that's why I'm investing in you. Investing, she repeated. That's a very business-like way to describe it. Everything's business, even the personal stuff. But he smiled when he said it, taking the edge off the words. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start on the harder lessons. What could possibly be harder than this? Learning when not to act. Learning when the smart play is doing nothing. His smile widened at her expression. I told you that you wouldn't like some of the lessons. He was right. She didn't like them, but she learned them anyway. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning, 3 months after Alina had shaken Dario's hand and agreed to become his partner. She was in Sofia's office, reviewing the latest batch of property records from Vittorio's seized assets, when Luca burst through the door with his laptop clutched to his chest and his hair standing on end like he'd been running his hands through it. I found something, he said, breathless. About your restaurant. About all of it. Alina's pulse quickened. What did you find? Luca set up his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. I've been digging into the ownership history of La Stella, trying to trace how the property moved after your grandmother died. The official records show it was sold to a development company called Adriatic Properties, which then flipped it to the hotel group. Clean transaction, everything documented. So Adriatic Properties didn't exist before they bought your restaurant. It was created specifically for that purchase. He pulled up incorporation documents. Formed 3 weeks before your grandmother died. Dissolved 6 months after the hotel sale went through. Classic shell corporation setup. Sophia leaned forward, her expression sharpening. Who owned it? That's where it gets interesting. The paperwork lists a holding company in Luxembourg, which is owned by another company in the Caymans, which traces back to, he paused for dramatic effect, a trust controlled by Serena Valenti. The room went very quiet. Serena, Alina said slowly. Not her father, not Vittorio. Serena herself. She was the one who ultimately profited from your restaurant's seizure. She created the shell company, bought the property at the forced sale price, renovated it, and sold it for triple what she paid. The hotel deal alone netted her over 4 million euros. Alina stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. She walked to the window, trying to process what she was hearing. Serena Valenti, the woman who tried to poison Dario, the woman currently in custody facing murder charges, had personally stolen her family's legacy and turned it into profit. There's more, Luca said quietly. I cross-referenced the timeline with other events. Serena bought the property 2 weeks after your grandmother died. The sale was processed unusually fast. Normally these things take months, but this went through in under 30 days. Someone was pushing it through quickly. Why? Alina asked, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. Why would Serena personally involve herself in something that small? She was running operations worth millions. What was one restaurant to her? That's what I couldn't figure out either, until I found this. Luca pulled up another document, this one a zoning map. Your restaurant sat on a corner lot in a neighborhood that was being targeted for major redevelopment. But it wasn't just any corner, it controlled access to an entire block of properties. Without your lot, the developers couldn't proceed with their plans. So Serena needed it specifically, Sophia said, not just for profit, but to unlock a larger deal. Exactly. And the larger deal was a partnership between the Valenti family and a consortium of international investors to redevelop 12 blocks of central Palermo. The project was worth over 200 million euros, but it all hinged on acquiring key properties, including yours. Alina felt something cold settle in her chest. My family wasn't just collateral damage. We were a specific target. You were an obstacle, Luca corrected gently, and Serena removed obstacles. The implications cascaded through Alina's mind, her grandmother's death coming just when Serena needed the property, the unusually fast sale process, the fact that Serena had personally controlled the shell company rather than delegating to underlings. My grandmother, she said quietly. Did Serena— We don't know, Sophia interrupted, her voice firm but not unkind. Your grandmother was elderly, her health was failing. The official cause of death was heart failure, which is consistent with the stress she was under. But the timing is suspicious enough that we should investigate further. I want to talk to her, Alina said abruptly. To Serena. I want to ask her myself. Sophia and Luca exchanged glances. That's not a good idea, Sophia said. She's in federal custody, awaiting trial for attempted murder. Access is heavily restricted. Dario can get me in. He has connections. Even if he could, what would you accomplish? Serena isn't going to confess to anything. She's too smart for that. Maybe. But I need to look her in the eye and ask the question. Alina turned from the window, her jaw set. I need to know if she killed my grandmother. I need to hear her say it, or deny it, or squirm around it. I just need to know. Luca looked uncomfortable. Alina, even if she did something, even if we could prove it, the statute of limitations on most charges related to your grandmother's death has probably expired, and proving that someone deliberately caused a heart attack through stress is nearly impossible. I don't care about prosecuting her. She's already going to prison for trying to kill Dario. I just want the truth. Sophia stood, moving to stand beside Alina at the window. The truth doesn't always set you free. Sometimes it just gives you new things to carry. I'm already carrying it. I've been carrying it for 5 years, thinking it was bad luck, or my grandmother's stubbornness, or just the way the world works. Now I know it was deliberate. Someone looked at my family and decided we were worth less than a real estate deal. I need to know who made that decision, and why. You already know who, Sophia pointed out. The why is money. It's always money. That's not enough. Alina's hands were shaking. She clasped them together, forcing them still. I need to hear her say it, even if it changes nothing, even if she lies. I need to look her in the eye. When Dario heard about it, he was silent for a long time. They were in his office, the evening sun turning the harbor outside golden and red. He'd listened to Alina's explanation without interrupting, his expression unreadable. You're sure about this? He asked finally. Yes. It won't be easy. The federals have her locked down tight, and they don't like interference with their witnesses. Even I can't just walk you into her cell. But you can try. I can. He was quiet for another moment, studying her face. What are you hoping to get out of this? Really? Alina had been asking herself the same question for hours. Closure, maybe, or just confirmation. I've spent 3 months learning how this world works, understanding the systems and the strategies, but it's all been abstract. Numbers on spreadsheets, names on documents. Serena is real. She's the person who actually made the decision to destroy my family. I need to confront that reality. And if she laughs in your face, if she admits everything and shows no remorse, then at least I'll know what I'm dealing with. Alina met his eyes. You said I needed to learn when not to act, when to wait. I've been patient, I've been strategic, but this isn't about strategy. This is personal, and I need to face it before I can move forward. Dario nodded slowly. All right, I'll make some calls, but you need to be prepared. Serena is smart and she's vicious. She'll try to get under your skin, try to hurt you just because she can. Don't give her the satisfaction. I won't. And Alina, whatever she tells you, whatever you learn, it doesn't change who you are. You're not defined by what they did to your family. You're defined by what you choose to do next. The words settled into her chest, warm and solid. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You might hate me after this conversation happens. It took Dario 4 days to arrange the meeting. 4 days of calling in favors, negotiating with federal prosecutors, and making promises Alina suspected were more significant than he let on. But finally, he got word that she'd have 20 minutes with Serena Valenti under supervised conditions. The federal detention center was exactly as grim as Alina expected. Concrete walls, harsh fluorescent lighting, guards who looked at her with the particular suspicion reserved for anyone visiting organized crime figures. Marco accompanied her, along with one of Dario's lawyers, who made it clear that she was there only as an observer. Don't threaten her, the lawyer advised as they waited in a sterile conference room. Don't make any statements that could be interpreted as witness intimidation. And for the love of everything, don't confess to anything. I'm not the one on trial, Alina pointed out. Everyone's on trial in a room like this. Just be careful. When they brought Serena in, Alina was struck by how different she looked from the elegant woman at the engagement party. The prison jumpsuit washed out her complexion. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry, no armor of wealth and beauty to hide behind. But her eyes were the same. Cold, calculating, missing nothing. Alina Moretti, Serena said, her voice carrying the same cultured tones despite everything. The waitress who saved Dario's life. I've been wondering when you'd show up. Have you? Alina sat down across the table, very aware of the guard standing by the door and the lawyer watching from the corner. Why's that? Because I know what Dario's been teaching you. I know he's turned you into his little project, showing you how the world really works. And I figured eventually you'd want to confront the person who destroyed your family. Serena smiled, sharp and mean. So, here I am. What do you want? Confession? Apology? Explanation? I want the truth. The truth? Serena laughed, but there was no humor in it. The truth is that your family was in the way. That's it. That's the whole story. You owned property I needed, you wouldn't sell, so I found another way to acquire it. Business. Nothing personal. My parents died. Your parents filed a complaint that threatened to expose the lending operation. They were going to sue Meridian Holdings, which would have drawn regulatory attention we couldn't afford. So yes, they had to be dealt with. Serena's tone was conversational, like she was discussing the weather. The mechanic was supposed to make it look like an accident. He did his job. Alina felt like she'd been punched in the chest. She'd known, abstractly, that her parents had been murdered, but hearing Serena admit it so casually, so dismissively, made it real in a way nothing else had. And my grandmother? She managed. Natural causes. I had nothing to do with that. Serena leaned back in her chair, studying Alina with clinical interest. Though I won't pretend I wasn't relieved when she died, made the property acquisition much simpler. Grieving granddaughter, drowning in debt, no emotional bandwidth to fight a legal battle. You practically gave me the restaurant. I was trying to survive. Everyone's trying to survive. The difference is that some of us are good at it, and some of us end up as collateral damage. Serena's smile widened. You know what's funny? You could have been collateral damage. Should have been, really. The invisible waitress nobody notices. But you just had to play hero, didn't you? Had to kiss Dario and whisper your little warning and insert yourself into a world that was never meant for you. Better than being a murderer who got caught. I didn't get caught. I got betrayed. For the first time, real emotion cracked through Serena's control, rage, bitter and hot. Dario was supposed to die that night. The families were supposed to fracture. My father's alliance with the Corses was supposed to take control. It was perfect. But you ruined it. One stupid, impulsive gesture from a nobody, and everything fell apart. Good, Alina said quietly. I'm glad I ruined it. I'm glad you're sitting here in a prison jumpsuit instead of running your empire. And I'm glad Dario lived. Serena's eyes narrowed. You care about him. How sweet. Has he told you what he really is? Has he explained that his grand reform project is just a different flavor of the same poison? He's not saving anyone, Alina. He's just rebranding exploitation and calling it progress. He's trying to change things. He's trying to control things. There's a difference. Serena leaned forward, her voice dropping. You think you're partners? You think you matter to him beyond your usefulness? You're a tool, a convenient weapon he can point at his enemies while pretending to be better than the rest of us. The moment you stop being useful, he'll discard you. You don't know him. I knew him well enough to know he'd check his wine before drinking it, well enough to know he'd investigate everyone involved in the conspiracy, well enough to know he'd turn this into an opportunity to consolidate power. Serena sat back again. I know exactly who Dario Vitale is. The question is, do you? Or are you so grateful he saved you from poverty that you can't see you've just traded one form of servitude for another? Alina wanted to argue, wanted to defend Dario and herself and the partnership they'd built, but Serena's words burrowed under her skin, finding doubts she'd been trying to ignore. Was she really Dario's partner? Or was she just useful enough to keep around until she wasn't? I see I've given you something to think about, Serena said, satisfied. Good. You deserve to know the truth before you get too attached to the illusion. The truth, Alina said, finding her voice again, is that you murdered my parents for a real estate deal, that you built your empire on destroying families like mine, that you tried to poison the one person who was actually trying to make things better. Whatever Dario is, whatever his flaws, he's not that. He's not you. Not yet. Give him time. The guard stepped forward. Time's up. Serena stood, graceful even in a prison jumpsuit. It's been enlightening, Alina. I hope you get everything you're looking for from this life you've chosen, though I suspect you won't. As they led her away, she looked back one more time. Tell Dario I said hello, and tell him I'll see him again, sooner than he thinks. The drive back from the detention center was silent. Marco knew better than to try to make conversation, and the lawyer was busy on her phone. Alina stared out the window, watching the city slide past, trying to process everything Serena had said. Your parents had to be dealt with. Business. Nothing personal. You're a tool. The words circled in her mind like vultures. When they got back to the office, Dario was waiting. He took one look at Alina's face and dismissed everyone else with a gesture. That bad? He asked when they were alone. She admitted it, all of it. My parents' murder, the property seizure, everything. Alina's voice sounded hollow. She talked about it like she was discussing a business transaction. That's how people like Serena survive. They remove the emotion, turn everything into numbers and strategies. It's easier that way. Is that how you do it? Dario was quiet for a moment. Sometimes, when I have to, but not always. She said I'm just a tool to you, that I'm useful now, but you'll discard me the moment I'm not. Do you believe her? Alina looked at him, really looked, trying to see past the careful control to the person underneath. I don't know. Should I? That's not a question I can answer for you. Dario moved to the window, the same place he always went when he needed to think. I could tell you that you matter to me, that this partnership is real, that I value you beyond your usefulness. But those are just words. Serena's right about one thing. People in this world lie all the time. The only way to know the truth is to watch what someone does, not what they say. So what have you done? I've given you access to everything. My operations, my finances, my strategies. I've taught you skills that make you dangerous to me if you ever chose to use them. I've put you in rooms with people who could destroy me, trusting that you wouldn't. He turned to face her. I've made you a genuine partner, which means giving you power over me. That's not something I do for a tool I plan to discard. Or it's exactly what you do to make me trust you before you use me. True. Dario smiled slightly. I can't prove I'm not manipulating you, Alina. That's the problem with trust. It requires a leap of faith. You have to decide if you believe me or if you believe Serena. Alina thought about the last 3 months. Thought about how Dario had never lied to her, even when the truth was ugly. How he'd given her real power, real knowledge, real choice. How he'd respected her decisions, even when he disagreed with them. She thought about Serena, who'd murdered her parents and stolen her family's legacy and called it business. I believe you, she said finally, but I need to know something. What? Are you doing this? The reforms, the legitimizing, all of it, because you actually want to change things? Or because it's the smart strategic move? Dario was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was careful. Honestly, both. I do want to change things. I'm tired of the violence, tired of the constant threat, tired of looking over my shoulder, wondering which family is going to challenge me next. But I'm also doing it because it's smart, because the old model is dying, and the families that adapt will survive, while the ones that don't will end up like Vittorio, in prison or dead. So it's practical idealism. Is there any other kind that actually works? He moved away from the window, coming to stand in front of her. I'm not a good man, Alina. I've done terrible things. I'll probably do more terrible things before this is over, but I'm trying to be better than I was, trying to build something that doesn't require destroying innocent people. That has to count for something. It does, Alina said quietly, and meant it. The moment stretched between them, something shifting. It wasn't trust exactly. Trust was too simple a word for what was building. It was more like recognition. Two people who'd both been forced to navigate impossible situations, who'd both chosen to try anyway. Serena said she'd see you again, Alina said, breaking the silence. Sooner than you think. What did she mean? Dario's expression darkened. She has information the prosecutors want about other families, other operations. She's going to try to negotiate a deal. Can she? Maybe, if what she knows is valuable enough. The federals love turning organized crime figures against each other. And Serena knows where a lot of bodies are buried, metaphorically and possibly literally. What happens if she gets out? She won't get out, but she might get her sentence reduced, and even from prison, she has resources, connections, people who still owe her loyalty. He met Alina's eyes. She'll try to hurt me however she can, which means she'll try to hurt you too. The threat should have scared her. Maybe it would have, 3 months ago. But now Alina just felt a cold determination settle into her bones. Let her try, she said. Dario smiled at that, pride and concern mixing on his face. You're getting scary. Good. Maybe people will stop underestimating me. I think that ship has sailed. The threat from Serena materialized faster than either of them expected. 2 weeks after Alina's visit to the detention center, news broke that Serena Valenti had agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. The details were sealed, but rumors spread fast through the families. Serena was giving up names, locations, operational details, everything she knew about everyone she'd ever worked with. It's a purge, Sophia explained during an emergency meeting. The federals are using her information to build cases against a dozen different operations. Some of them connect to us, most don't. But the families are panicking because no one knows who she's giving up or what evidence she has. Has she mentioned Dario specifically? Alina asked. Not that we know of, but that doesn't mean she won't. Sophia pulled up a document on her tablet. The problem is that Serena was involved in enough different operations that her testimony alone could be devastating even without hard evidence. She knows which businesses are fronts, which officials are corrupt, which families are connected to which crimes. So what do we do? Marco asked. Dario had been quiet through most of the meeting, staring at the table with an expression Alina was learning to recognize. He was running scenarios, calculating responses, looking for the play that would hurt least. We get ahead of it, he said finally. Before Serena can control the narrative, we control it ourselves. How? Sophia asked. We go public. Not about everything, but about enough. We acknowledge that some of our historical operations were questionable, announce that we're cooperating with investigators to clean things up, and position ourselves as part of the solution rather than part of the problem. That's risky, Sophia said. Very risky. Admitting to anything could open us up to prosecution. Not if we do it right. We admit to things that are already known or that have statute of limitations. We offer cooperation in exchange for immunity on historical matters, and we make it clear that we're trying to transform into legitimate operations. Dario looked around the table. It's a gamble, but sitting back and waiting for Serena to destroy us piece by piece is a guaranteed loss. The families will see this as betrayal, Marco warned. They'll think you're selling them out to save yourself. Some will, but the smart ones will realize I'm offering them a template, a way to transition before they're forced to. Dario's jaw was set. I'm done playing defense. We're going on offense, and we're doing it now. The press conference was held 3 days later in a hotel conference room that Sofia had chosen for its neutral territory and good security. Dario stood behind a podium, Alina and Sofia flanking him, while reporters and cameras filled every available space. "I'm here today to address recent allegations about my business operations and my family's history," Dario began, his voice steady. "I won't insult your intelligence by claiming everything we've done has been legal. It hasn't. Like many families in Sicily, mine built its wealth on activities that ranged from questionable to criminal. But I'm here to announce that we're changing direction." He went on to detail a comprehensive plan, transitioning illegal operations to legitimate businesses, cooperating with authorities on historical matters in exchange for immunity, establishing a fund to compensate victims of past criminal activities. "This isn't about saving myself," Dario said, looking directly into the cameras. "This is about recognizing that the old ways are dying. We can either die with them or build something new. I choose to build." The questions came fast and pointed. "Are you cooperating against other families?" "I'm cooperating to clean up our own operations. What other families choose to do is their business." "Do you acknowledge responsibility for past crimes?" "I acknowledge that my family's business practices have caused harm. We're working to make that right." "What about Serena Valenti's testimony? Is this a response to her cooperation?" "This is a response to reality. The world is changing. We're changing with it." Alina watched from the side of the room, seeing the calculation in the reporters' faces. Some were skeptical, some intrigued, all of them sensing a story bigger than they'd expected. When it was over, when the cameras had stopped rolling and the reporters had scattered to file their stories, Dario looked exhausted. "That was either brilliant or catastrophic," he said quietly. "We'll find out which in about 12 hours when the families respond." The response came in 6. Pietro Russo called first, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "You just declared war on all of us. You know that, right?" "I declared an end to a war we were already losing," Dario replied calmly. "If you're smart, you'll follow my lead. If you're not, you'll end up like Vittorio." 3 other family heads called with variations on the same theme: anger, betrayal, threats. But 2 of them, including one of the Grecos, called to ask how they could implement similar transitions. "It's working," Sofia said, monitoring the response. "Not universally, but enough. You've split the families between those who see this as survival and those who see it as surrender." "And the ones who see it as surrender?" Alina asked. "They'll try to remove him, soon." Sofia met Dario's eyes. "You need to be careful. You just made yourself a target to everyone who wants things to stay the same." "I've been a target since my father died," Dario said. "At least now I'm a target with a plan." The assassination attempt came 2 weeks later. Alina was with Dario in his car, heading back from a meeting with prosecutors to finalize immunity agreements, when the motorcycle pulled alongside them. She saw it in her peripheral vision, 2 riders, the passenger reaching into his jacket. "Gun!" Marco shouted from the front seat, already moving. Everything happened very fast and very slow at the same time. The window beside Dario exploded inward. Marco was shouting orders. The driver was accelerating, swerving. The motorcycle kept pace, the shooter lining up another shot. Alina didn't think. She grabbed Dario and pulled him down, covering his body with her own, as bullets punched through the car's interior. She felt something hot graze her shoulder, heard Dario shouting her name, heard the screech of tires and the crunch of metal as their car collided with something. Then silence. "Alina." Dario's voice was urgent, his hands on her face. "Alina, look at me." She opened her eyes, not remembering closing them. Dario was above her, his face cut and bleeding, but alive. Alive. "You're hurt," he said, his voice shaking in a way she'd never heard before. "You're bleeding." "I'm fine." She tried to sit up, felt the world tilt dangerously. "Are you... did they... I'm fine. You covered me. You stupid, brave, reckless." He pulled her against him, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "Don't ever do that again." "You're welcome," she mumbled into his shoulder. Marco was calling for backup, calling for medical help, securing the scene. The shooters were gone, disappeared into Palermo's maze of streets, and Alina was bleeding in Dario Vitale's arms, having just saved his life for the second time. Some patterns, she thought distantly, were hard to break. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and regret. Alina lay in the bed, her shoulder bandaged and throbbing, while a doctor explained in irritatingly calm tones that she'd been lucky. The bullet had grazed her rather than penetrating, missing bone and major arteries by centimeters. She'd need rest, physical therapy, probably a scar to remember the day by. Lucky. Right. Dario hadn't left her side since they'd arrived, ignoring the doctor's suggestions that he get his own cuts treated. He sat in the chair next to her bed, his jaw tight, his hands clenched on the armrests like he was physically restraining himself from something. You should go, Alina said when the doctor finally left. You have people to call, security to arrange. Whoever did this to find... Marco's handling it. Dario. I'm not leaving. His voice was flat, brooking no argument. You took a bullet meant for me. The least I can do is sit here until you're cleared to leave. It barely counts as taking a bullet. More like taking a very aggressive scratch. Don't. He finally looked at her and the expression on his face made her chest tighten. Don't downplay what you did. Don't make jokes about it. You could have died. But I didn't. You didn't. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back. This is the second time you've saved my life. Second time you've put yourself between me and death without hesitation. Why? Alina thought about the question. Thought about the waitress she'd been 4 months ago, keeping her head down and surviving. Thought about the person she'd become. Someone who looked at danger and ran toward it instead of away. Because you're trying to change things, she said finally. Because you're not like Serena or Vittorio or any of the others who just take and destroy and call it business. You're actually trying to build something better that's worth protecting. Is it worth your life? I don't know, but it felt right in the moment. Dario was quiet for a long time, staring at her with an intensity that made her want to look away. When I saw that gun, he said softly, when I realized what was about to happen, all I could think was that I'd brought you into this. That I'd taken someone who should have been safe and turned them into a target. I made my own choices. Did you? Or did I manipulate you into them? He sat down again, leaning forward. Serena said you were a tool, that I'd use you and discard you. What if she was right? What if I'm so focused on winning that I can't see I'm destroying the one person who actually believes in what I'm trying to do? You're not destroying me. I'm stronger now than I've ever been. You're in a hospital bed with a bullet wound. And I'm alive, so are you. I call that a win. He laughed, startled and pained. Your definition of winning is concerning. Learned from the best. Before Dario could respond, Marco entered, his expression grim. We found them, the shooters. One of Pietro Russo's guys recognized the motorcycle. It belongs to a contractor the DeLucas used last year for a similar job. The DeLucas. Dario's voice went cold. I thought they were staying neutral. Apparently not. We're still tracing who gave the order, but the connection is solid. Then we respond. Tonight, I want... No, Alina interrupted. Both men turned to stare at her. No? Dario repeated. No violence. Not yet. She pushed herself up in the bed, ignoring the pain that lanced through her shoulder. You just went public with a reform agenda. You positioned yourself as the voice of change. If you immediately retaliate with the same old methods, you destroy everything you've built. They tried to kill me. Kill us. That requires a response. Then respond strategically, not violently. Alina's mind was already working through possibilities, lessons learned over 3 months of watching Dario navigate impossible situations. The DeLucas went after you because they see you as weak. Prove them wrong without proving them right. Dario studied her, something shifting in his expression. What do you suggest? Exposure. You have evidence they hired the shooters. Give it to the prosecutors. Let the federals handle it. Shows you meant what you said about cooperating with authorities. Shows the other families what happens when they come after you. They don't get a war, they get arrested. That's cold. That's smart. You taught me that. Marco was nodding slowly. She's right. The families are watching to see if your reform is real or just performance. You hit back with violence, they know it's performance. You hit back with the law, you change the game. Dario was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then he pulled out his phone. Sophia, I need you to compile everything we have on the DeLucas' involvement in today's attack. We're handing it over to the prosecutors within the hour. He listened to her response, then, I know it's dangerous. Do it anyway. When he hung up, he looked at Alina with something that might have been respect or might have been concern. You're getting scary good at this. Good. Maybe next time people will think twice before shooting at us. The fallout from the DeLucas arrest was swift and brutal. Federal agents raided their operations within 48 hours, seizing assets and taking 3 family members into custody. The evidence Dario had provided was airtight: phone records, financial transfers, testimony from the contractor who'd supplied the motorcycle. More importantly, it sent a message to every other family. The rules had changed. Coming after Dario Vitale no longer meant risking a street war. It meant risking federal prison. 2 more families have reached out about transition plans, Sophia reported a week later during Alina's first day back in the office. They want to know how to legitimize their operations before they end up like the DeLucas. And the ones who don't want to transition? Alina asked. They're getting quieter, backing off, waiting to see what happens next. Sophia looked at Dario. You're winning, slowly, painfully, but you're winning. Doesn't feel like winning, Dario said, but there was satisfaction beneath the words. Alina's shoulder was healing, though it ached when it rained and occasionally woke her up at night. The doctor had been right about the scar. She'd have a permanent reminder of the day she'd taken a bullet for a crime lord. Some girls got tattoos to commemorate important moments. Alina got shot. The thought made her laugh, which made Dario look at her with concern. I'm fine, she assured him, just thinking about how weird my life has gotten. Any regrets? She considered the question seriously. 4 months ago, she'd been invisible, powerless, drowning in debt and grief. Now she was sitting in the office of one of Sicily's most powerful men, helping reshape the criminal underworld into something that might actually resemble legitimate business. No, she said, no regrets, but I do have a request. Name it. The restaurant, La Stella. I want it back. Whoop. Dario's expression shifted. Alina, I know it's a hotel now. I know the current owners paid good money for it, but it was stolen from my family. Serena admitted it. Vittorio's records prove it. That property should have been mine. She met his eyes. I want it back. Not for revenge. Not even for justice. I just want my family's legacy restored. Even if we could convince the current owners to sell, do you have any idea what it would cost? The building is worth at least $6.5 million. I know. I've looked at the current market value. Alina pulled out a folder she'd been carrying. I also know that the hotel group that owns it is struggling. They overextended during the purchase, took on debt they're having trouble servicing. They might be willing to sell at a loss just to get out from under it. Dario took the folder, flipping through her analysis. You've been busy. You taught me to do my homework. And if they agree to sell? What then? You don't have 6 million euros lying around? No, but you do. Alina took a breath. I want to buy it from them using funds from the victim compensation program you announced. The restaurant qualifies. It was seized through fraudulent means. My family was a direct victim of Vittorio's schemes. Use the compensation to restore the property to its rightful owner. That's not what the fund is for. It's meant to provide financial compensation to victims, not to buy back specific properties. Then change the program. Make it about restoration, not just compensation. Show the other victims that you're serious about making things right. She leaned forward, ignoring the pull in her shoulder. This isn't just about me. There are 46 other families who lost businesses to Vittorio's schemes. Giving me back the restaurant shows them what's possible, shows them that you meant what you said about building something better. Dario set down the folder, studying her face. You've thought this through. I've thought about nothing else for a week. And what will you do with it once you own it? Turn it back into a restaurant? Run it yourself? I don't know yet, maybe. Or maybe I sell it for actual market value and use the money to help the other families. Or maybe I turn it into something new entirely, something that honors what it was while being something different. She smiled slightly. I'll figure it out. But first I need to own it. Sophia, Dario called. When she appeared in the doorway, he handed her the folder. Look into this. See if the hotel group is willing to negotiate, and restructure the compensation fund to include property restoration when applicable. Sophia scanned the documents, her eyebrows rising. This is ambitious. This is right, Dario corrected. Make it happen. The negotiation took 3 weeks. 3 weeks during which Alina threw herself into the details with an intensity that surprised even her. She learned about property law, commercial real estate, debt restructuring. She sat in on meetings with the hotel group's lawyers, watching as they tried to squeeze every possible euro out of the deal. And she learned something about herself. She was good at this. Good at seeing through bullshit. Good at finding leverage. Good at making people think they were getting what they wanted while she got what she needed. Dario noticed. You're a natural negotiator, he said after one particularly brutal session, better than half my lawyers. I spent 5 years negotiating with creditors who wanted to take everything I had. This is easier. At least now I have resources to work with. You have more than resources. You have vision. That's rarer. The hotel group finally agreed to sell for $4.2 million, below market value but enough to clear their debt and get out clean. The Victim Compensation Fund covered the purchase, and ownership transferred to Alina Moretti 6 weeks after she'd first proposed the idea. Standing outside the building that had been her family's legacy, holding the deed in her hands, Alina felt something shift in her chest. It wasn't quite closure. The past couldn't be undone, her parents couldn't be brought back, her grandmother's suffering couldn't be erased. But it was something. Recognition, maybe. Acknowledgement that what had been taken could, sometimes, be restored. What now? Dario asked, standing beside her on the sidewalk. Now I decide what this place becomes. She looked at the building, imagining possibilities. I've been thinking about what you said, about building something better. What if this became more than a restaurant? What do you mean? What if it became a resource center, a place that helps small business owners navigate the kind of predatory lending that destroyed my family? Legal advice, financial counseling, advocacy. We could use the Victim Compensation Fund to staff it, and the ground floor could still be a restaurant, keep the legacy alive while creating something new. Dario was quiet, considering. That would send a message. That's the idea. Show people that change is real, that the families can actually help instead of just taking. You've really thought this through. I've had nothing but time to think while my shoulder healed. She turned to face him. What do you think? Is it naive? Too idealistic? It's both, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. He smiled. I think you should do it, and I think you should run it. Run it? I'm not qualified to. You're more qualified than you think. You know what it's like to be a victim of the system. You've learned how the system works from the inside. You have connections, resources, and apparently a talent for negotiation that would make most lawyers jealous. He met her eyes. You wanted to honor your family's legacy. This would do it better than any restaurant could. Alina looked back at the building, feeling the weight of possibilities settling on her shoulders. It would be hard work. It would require skills she was still learning. It would mean confronting the reality of what had been done to families like hers, over and over again. But it would also mean something. It would mean the people who destroyed her family hadn't won, that their cruelty had been transformed into something that actually helped people. Okay, she said, I'll do it, but I'm going to need help. Whatever you need. Over the next 3 months, Alina threw herself into the project with single-minded determination. She hired lawyers who specialized in consumer protection. She recruited financial counselors who'd worked with struggling businesses. She found a chef who'd trained under her grandmother years ago and convinced him to run the restaurant portion. And slowly, impossibly, the Moretti Foundation took shape. The grand opening was held on a warm evening in late summer, 6 months after Alina had kissed Dario Vitale and saved his life. The building had been renovated, still recognizable as her family's restaurant, but updated, expanded, transformed into something that served a larger purpose. The ground floor was the restaurant, serving the same kind of honest food her great-grandfather had believed in. The upper floors housed offices for lawyers and counselors, conference rooms for consultations, a small library of resources for small business owners. And in the main lobby, Alina had installed a plaque with the names of all 47 businesses destroyed by Vittorio's schemes. A memorial, but also a promise. This wouldn't happen again. Dario stood beside her as guests filed in. Other victims who'd accepted compensation from the fund, family heads who'd agreed to transition their operations, prosecutors who'd worked the cases, journalists who'd covered the story. Nervous? He asked quietly. Terrified, she admitted. What if nobody comes? What if this whole thing is a disaster? It's not going to be a disaster. Look around. You did this. You took something that was destroyed and built it into something that matters. Alina looked at this crowd gathering, at people shaking hands and making connections, at her grandmother's friend working in the kitchen, preparing food that smelled like memory and hope. We did this, she corrected. I couldn't have done any of it without you. You would have found a way. You're stubborn like that. She laughed, feeling some of the tension ease. Is that a compliment? It's an observation, though I suppose it could be both. Sophia appeared, carrying 2 glasses of wine. For the founders, she said, handing them over. Though I've checked both for poison, so you can relax. Some habits die hard, Dario said, but he was smiling. The evening unfolded with surprising smoothness. People ate, talked, made connections. 3 business owners who'd been victimized by predatory lenders signed up for consultations on the spot. A local journalist asked for an interview about how the foundation planned to operate. 2 of the transitioning families made donations to support the work. And through it all, Alina moved through the crowd, shaking hands and answering questions and trying to absorb the fact that this was real, that she'd actually pulled it off. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had left, she found herself alone in the restaurant portion with Dario. They sat at a corner table, the same table where her grandmother used to sit and watch the dining room, making sure everyone was happy and fed. She would have been proud, Dario said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. Your grandmother, she would have been proud of what you've built here. I hope so, though she probably would have had opinions about my business partners. Fair. I'm not exactly the kind of person parents dream about for their children. No, but you're the kind of person who actually keeps his word, who helps when he says he'll help. Who's trying to be better than he was? She met his eyes. That counts for something. Does it count enough? The question hung between them, weighted with meaning that went beyond business partnerships and foundations. Alina thought about the last 6 months, about how they'd gone from strangers to allies to something she didn't quite have words for, about how he'd taught her to see the world clearly, to use power instead of being used by it, to fight smart instead of just fighting, about how somewhere along the way she'd stopped seeing a crime lord and started seeing just a man, complicated, flawed, trying. Yeah, she said softly. It counts enough. Dario reached across the table, taking her hand in his. I meant what I said earlier, about you being more qualified than you think, but I also need to say something else. What? You're not obligated to stay in this world. You've got the foundation now, you've got resources, you've got skills. You could walk away from all of it, from me, from the families, from everything, build a completely legitimate life, and I wouldn't stop you, wouldn't hold it against you. You've earned that choice. Alina looked at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers. And if I don't want to walk away? Then I'd like to try something new. Not a business partnership, not a strategic alliance, just us, whatever that looks like. That's probably a terrible idea. Almost certainly. People will talk, the families, the prosecutors, everyone. Let them. And when the next crisis happens, the next assassination attempt, the next impossible decision, we handle it together, like we've been doing. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm not promising easy, Alina. I can't. But I can promise honest. I can promise that I'll keep trying to be better. And I can promise that you'll never be a tool or a weapon or anything other than a partner, equal and valued. She thought about Serena's words in the prison visiting room, about being useful until she wasn't, about being discarded. But she also thought about the last 6 months, about every time Dario had listened to her ideas, respected her decisions, given her real power instead of just the appearance of it, about how he'd sat by her hospital bed after she'd taken a bullet for him, looking at her like she mattered more than strategy or survival. Okay, she said. Let's try it. Us. Whatever that means. He smiled, wide and genuine and maybe a little bit stunned. Yeah? Yeah. But I have conditions. Of course you do. No more secrets. If you're planning something that affects me or the foundation, I want to know. Full transparency. Done. And no more treating me like I need protection. I proved I can handle danger. Respect that. That one's harder. But I'll try. And if this doesn't work, if we try the whole us thing and it falls apart, we don't let it destroy what we've built professionally. The foundation matters too much. Agreed. Though I don't think it's going to fall apart. Why not? Because we're both too stubborn to let it, and because... He paused, seeming to search for words. Because I've never met anyone who saw me clearly and didn't run, who understood exactly what I was and chose to stay anyway. That's not something I'm going to screw up if I can help it. Alina felt something warm unfold in her chest, not the desperate gratitude of being saved, not the transactional appreciation of a useful alliance, something quieter and more solid, something that felt like it might actually last. Good, she said, because I'm pretty invested at this point. Would be inconvenient if you turned out to be an asshole after all. He laughed, the sound echoing through the empty restaurant. I'll do my best not to be, though no promises. They sat there for a while longer, hands joined across the table, talking about plans for the foundation and next steps with the family transitions and a dozen other practical matters. But underneath the business talk was something new, something that felt like possibility. Eventually, Sophia poked her head in. "I'm locking up, unless you two plan to stay here all night." "We're leaving," Dario assured her. "Just needed a minute." Outside, the Palermo night was warm and alive with sound. Alina stood on the sidewalk in front of her family's restored building, breathing in salt air and jasmine and the particular scent of a city that had broken her and remade her. "What are you thinking?" Dario asked. "That 6 months ago I was a waitress barely surviving. Now I'm running a foundation, reshaping criminal enterprises, and apparently dating a reformed crime lord. My grandmother would be horrified and impressed in equal measure. Which would win?" "Impressed, probably. She was practical like that." Alina turned to look at him. "What about you? Any regrets about letting that waitress kiss you?" "Just one." Her stomach dropped. "What?" "That it took me so long to realize she was the best thing that ever happened to me." He pulled her close, careful of her still healing shoulder. "No more regrets after that." "Good answer. I'm occasionally capable of getting things right." She kissed him then, on the sidewalk outside the building that had been stolen and restored, in a city that was slowly learning to be something better than it had been. It wasn't the desperate kiss of saving his life or the calculated move of stopping poison. It was just a kiss, simple and complicated and exactly right. When they finally pulled apart, Alina rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, strong and steady, and alive, because she'd been brave enough to be reckless. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now? We keep building, keep changing things, keep trying to be better than we were." Sounds exhausting. Probably will be. Worth it, though? Definitely worth it. They stood there for another moment. Two people who'd both been shaped by violence and loss and impossible choices, who'd somehow found in each other the possibility of something different. Then Marco pulled up with the car, and they got in and drove through Palermo's winding streets toward whatever came next. The families were still transitioning. The prosecutors were still building cases. The world was still complicated and dangerous and frequently unjust. But in a renovated building that smelled like her grandmother's cooking, a foundation was taking shape. Victims were getting help. Small businesses were learning to protect themselves. And the invisible waitress who'd kissed a crime lord to save his life had become someone who actually mattered. Not because someone gave her permission, not because she earned it through suffering, but because she'd seen something wrong and refused to look away. Because she'd been brave enough to act when action was stupid. Because she'd learned to turn powerlessness into power and use it for something that actually helped. The restaurant was gone, transformed into something new. Her parents and grandmother couldn't be brought back. The past couldn't be undone. But the future? The future was still being written. And Alina Moretti had finally learned to hold the pen.